Chapter 395. Duokong looked at Xiaoxian, and when he saw Xiaoxian nod, he went over to count. Xiaoxian also took out the 5 crystals. In that case, these things are naturally yours. And Yin smiled, and the anxious atmosphere from before dissipated, letting people take the crystals away. And Yin also let people drag the cauldron that was standing crookedly on the ground. This cauldron is a gift to you as an apology. Although the cauldron was a failure, it was still bronze after all. If it was not satisfactory as a weapon, it could be used to make other things. Even Black Bear felt that this gift was good. Duokong naturally felt that this gift was very cost-effective, but it also depended on Xiaoxian's thoughts. Young people were, after all, impetuous. Sometimes, in order to fight, it was understandable that they did not want the benefits in their hands. Unexpectedly, Xiaoxian smiled and did not refuse. Thank you. After the two sides completed the transaction, and Yin left with his people, and the trading point returned to its previous state. However, those who wanted to take advantage of the situation were quite disappointed. They regretted that they did not fight. The people of the Yanjiao tribe packed up their things and left amidst the discussion of the people around them. The people of the Taiha tribe also left. This was something they had arranged long ago. On the other side, the people around Black Bear watched the Yanjiao people leave. They raised their thick fingers and pointed in the direction the Yanjiao people left. Boss, should we follow them? Of course. I don't believe that's all they have. Black Bear grinned. The people of the Yanjiao and Taiha skillfully left Amba City, took care of a group of followers, and then quickly left along the road they came from. Originally, Duokong planned to go another way. This was what they did every time. When they came, they would take one road, and when they went back, they would take another road. It was safer this way. However, Xiaoxian suggested that they go along the original road for a while and then change. Anyway, the two roads were not far from each other at the beginning, so it was not too late to change. There wasn't much cover around this section of the road, so if there was anyone, they would be able to discover it in advance. At first, the people from Taiha were against Xiaoxian's decision, but fortunately, they would still change their route when the time came. After thinking about it, they reluctantly accepted it. However, it was natural for them to have their own opinions, so they didn't give him any face. The large cauldron had already been wrapped in a green-gray cloth, so it wasn't as conspicuous as before. The Yanjiao people were strong, so it wasn't that strenuous for them to carry it. After a while, they would switch to another person to carry it one by one, so it wouldn't take too much time. The journey back was much more dangerous. There were quite a few robberies. Previously, when they saw the Yanjiao people picking up good stuff, there were already quite a few groups who wanted to rob them. This time, no one held back. Those who needed to be killed were killed. So, a slight sound was heard. More robbers? Everyone was on high alert. Xiaoxian smiled when he saw the approaching figure. They're finally here, Xiaoxian said. You knew we were coming? Black Bear asked doubtfully. I guess. Xiaoxian didn't say anything else. He had only noticed Black Bear's gaze when he was leaving, and based on other people's evaluation of Black Bear, he had made a final guess. That was why he had everyone follow the original path. The danger level of this journey was not high, and if no one came after this journey, they would switch to another path. Black Bear's thick eyebrows twitched. Then he laughed loudly. You Yanjiao people are really interesting. If they could guess that he was coming, then they could definitely guess something else. The Yanjiao people were smarter than he thought. Seeing that it was Black Bear, the others relaxed slightly. Duokong walked up and asked, Could it be that you still want to trade with us? They had left in a hurry, so they still had some things that they hadn't sold. There were even more people from Taiha left. Hearing this, they looked at Black Bear expectantly. That's right, Black Bear said in a rough voice. I know you still have those glowing crystals. I'll trade with you at the same price as in yen. How about that? Seeing Xiaoxian nod, Duokong was happy. When he heard that Black Bear would buy all of their remaining goods, Duokang's eyes narrowed into slits. The people from Taiha were no longer angry. In fact, they were quite grateful for Xiaoxian's decision. Now that they had sold all of their goods, it would be easier for them to go back. After letting his men complete the trade, Black Bear asked Xiaoxian about the use of the glowing crystals. After Xiaoxian finished, Black Bear touched the thick leather hat on his head, took out a piece of bone engraved with a bear pattern, and handed it to Xiaoxian. If you have such goods in the future, you can come to us directly. I'll still eat the animal skin and other goods. Oh, and that stone carving of yours, if you have it, I also want it. It's best if it's a giant bear. But if there's no giant bear, other things are fine too. Black Bear also mentioned their base in Amba City. Coupled with the bone plate, if Black Bear wasn't in Amba City, they could still trade as usual. The Yinjiao people didn't have to worry about being cheated. Cooperation? The Taiha people were a little surprised. Black Bear's reputation was indeed good, but he didn't always have a fixed partner. They had trading forces everywhere, so they didn't have to be afraid of the people of Amba City. Even if they were enemies of Amba City, they would still trade with them, not to mention the Yanjiao people who only had a little friction with them. But even so, the Taiha people were still surprised that Black Bear would find Yanjiao people to cooperate. Could it be that he really took a fancy to Yanjiao's crystals? After the trade was completed, Black Bear added, "Don't believe the people of Amba City, especially when they mention rules. Because in the hearts of the Amba people of the 6 tribes, what they say is the rules." The people of Amba City never had fixed rules. In the past, when the Yanjiao people went to Amba City to trade, it wasn't conspicuous, and there weren't many things that they really valued. But this time was different. The Yanjiao people not only beat the people of Amba City, but also took out things that would cause trouble. "Thank you for telling us," Xiaoxian thanked him. "Even if I didn't tell you, you would still be on guard." Black Bear's eyes swept over a large wooden box next to Xiaoxian. "Can I know what's inside?" Just now when Xiaoxian moved the box, he heard a little sound. It wasn't the sound of metal, but more like the sound of stones colliding. Could it be that there was still something good that hadn't been taken out? As a businessman, sometimes his curiosity was still very strong. Otherwise, how could he smell a business opportunity? "Those are not things for trade." Xiaoxian refused. With that said, Black Bear was even more curious. He pestered Xiaoxian for a while, promised some other benefits, and took out some small bronze objects as gifts. Only then did he let Xiaoxian open the box. When he saw the things inside, Black Bear was stunned for a moment, then burst out laughing. Then, in a good mood, he called his men to leave. The people of the Taiha tribe, because of their angle, did not see what was in Xiaoxian's box. What was inside was not the things that Xiaoxian exchanged with the crystal stones. Naturally, it was something else. What was it? Ignoring the curious gazes of the people of the Taiha tribe, Xiaoxian packed up his things and planned to set off again. The person he was waiting for had arrived, so it was time to change his route. With Black Bear as a partner, the Yanjiao people would not have to worry about being rejected by the people of Amba City when they brought things to trade. After taking 2 steps, Xiaoxian stopped again. He saw that the cloth wrapped around the cauldron had been torn. Guangyi was letting people wrap it with other cloth. Although this was a failed cauldron, the material and parts of the cauldron were still very exquisite. The body of the cauldron was heavy and thick, and the engravings and words on it were full of an ancient and fierce sense of mystery. At that time, when An Yen proposed to give the cauldron as a gift to the Yanjiao people as an apology, the others felt that because the cauldron was a bronze object, it could be recast into other objects, or exchanged for more benefits, so the Yanjiao people accepted the gift. But Xiaoxian agreed to accept the cauldron not entirely because of this. The main reason was that he was very interested in the engravings and words on the cauldron. The people of the Great 6 cities used the cauldron as a ceremonial object. The cauldron symbolized power. Whether it was a major celebration or a reward for people, many times they would record some more special things on the cauldron, representing different meanings. And Xiaoxian was interested in this. Yes, most of the people here were literate, but the extent of their knowledge was very limited. The words they were familiar with were the words commonly used in daily transactions. As for the more complicated words, there were fewer people who understood them. Some of the more complicated sentences were extremely simple but profound, just like the conclusion used by the tribe in the past. They were even more confusing, so there were even fewer people who cared about them. Many people made their own weapons but never added words on it. At most, they added their tribe's totem or name and nothing else. They felt that it was too troublesome, and were not as particular as the people of the Great 6 cities. Not only did they add words, but they also drew a lot of other patterns that were superfluous to them. Just like this cauldron, although they knew that there were words on the cauldron, they only felt that it was for decorative purposes and could not understand it. They were also not interested in these things, so naturally they would not look at it. When the cauldron was wrapped up again, Xiaoxian's gaze moved away from it. Let's change our route. Duokong called the rest of the people who were still resting, and the group set off again. On the other side, Black Bear led his people away. There were also people who tried to rob them, but they were all dealt with quickly. Boss, you saw that kid from the Yinjiao tribe in the box. What was in it? One of the people in Black Bear's team pulled a leaf from a nearby tree, wiped the blood on his sword, and asked. Something interesting, Black Bear replied. What could make you laugh like that? Everyone was puzzled. How many of the people in Yen sent out do you think will come back? Black Bear asked. They had a wide network of people in City, so they were naturally aware of Yan's movements. Don't be fooled by Yan's righteous appearance in front of others. He kept talking about the rules, but in reality he was ruthless. As soon as the Yinjiao people set off, he sent people to chase after them. He also knew that the Yinjiao people used to take a different route back, so he sent people to chase them in that direction. He did not expect that the Yinjiao people would go back the way they came. However, they would definitely meet the Yinjiao people later on. Speaking of which, neither route was safe. On one side, there were people from other tribes waiting to ambush them, and on the other, there was Yan's people chasing after them. If it was before, Black Bear might have sympathized with the Yinjiao people, but now, Black Bear felt that the other side might be the unlucky one. The others in the group were still discussing Black Bear's words. Seeing Black Bear's gloating face, they could not help but ask, Boss, how many of Yan's people do you think will come back? Even if they fail, at least half of them will come back, right? Half? Hey, 10 or 20 is more like it. How is that possible? The others did not believe it. Is it a trap? That's impossible. It was not that they looked down on the Yinjiao people, but they knew that most tribesmen still cherished weapons. Even if they set up an ambush, they would choose wood, rope, and so on. If that was not enough, they would use all kinds of medicine. As for metal, they were pitifully few because they were reluctant to use it. The lethality of wood compared to metal was, of course, much smaller. Bone was very restrictive and inconvenient to use, so in the use of many traps, many tribesmen may not be able to compare to the people of the 6 great cities. Not everyone was as generous as the slave masters of the 6 great cities. In this world, there are not only wood and metal. Black Bear sighed. Stone tools, this thing that had almost disappeared from the stage of history, he saw in the Yinjiao people. Moreover, they were very meticulously made, as if the maker had already thought about how to use those stone tools. Like a spider perched in a hidden corner, when it pulled out the first silk, it knew what kind of web it was going to weave. Chapter 396. When Xiaoxian was in the free trade area, before he took out the crystal stones, he would spend his free time every night polishing stone tools. Because the animal skin sold quickly, many of the Yinjiao people were idle for the next few days. Xiaoxian asked them to find stones, and then choose the stones they were satisfied with and polish them into the required stone tools. Xiaoxian learned from Duokong and the others what kind of terrain the road back was, how high the mountains were, how much vegetation was distributed, how many species of animals and plants there were, and so on. Therefore, when he was polishing the stone tools, he had already thought about what kind of traps and nooses to set up. Even if there were no crystal stones, according to Duokang's past experience, they would still encounter a lot of robbers. In the free trade area of Amba City, many people could talk and laugh with you one day, but the next day they could ambush you in the mountains and kill you. When going out to trade, it was necessary to be vigilant. Therefore, Xiaoxian made these stone tools to prevent too many people from chasing after them. Stone tools were not like gold tools. As long as there were no special requirements, the requirements for stone were not very high. Usable stone materials were everywhere in the mountains and forests, unlike gold tools, which were not distressed to waste. For many tribesmen, a small dagger could be precious. Of course, it was impossible to throw out gold tools like darts or hidden weapons. If they threw them away and couldn't get them back, they would definitely be distressed. Obviously, the people sent out by Yen to chase after them had the same idea. They inquired about the Yinjiao people's previous style of conduct and inquired about their past deeds. But they had never heard that they would use large-scale traps and hidden weapons on their way back, so they didn't care about chasing after them. At first, because the Yinjiao people did not follow the original route, they didn't see any figures. Later, when they saw footprints and other traces of walking, they excitedly continued to chase until they heard the slight sound of a string bouncing. It was as if a bird had flown up from a tree, and then they were faced with dense wooden thorns. It was really too sudden. Even if they reacted quickly, they couldn't completely avoid the sudden attack of the wooden thorns. One of the members of the team waved the sword in his hand, and the sword shadows formed a shield, blocking the wooden thorns that were shot at him. At the same time, he kicked the ground with the tip of his foot and quickly bounced away, trying to avoid these wooden thorns. However, when he landed again, he stepped on something. He felt as if there was a thin rope suddenly pulled out from under his feet, and then there were wooden thorns coming at him from the side. Not only that, every time he took a step back, he would trigger a hidden noose, and then round after round of attacks. There were so many people in the team. As long as one or two of them triggered the trap, once they panicked, they would trigger the other traps. It would be impossible to guard against them. Wooden thorns were not as hard as metal, but when they were shot out at high speed, they could still injure people. Furthermore, there were other things on the wooden thorns. Once they broke through the skin, the poison on the thorns would spread through the blood. It would not kill them, but it would cause them a lot of trouble. It would also affect the speed of their pursuit. Bang! With a soft sound, a cloud of light yellow powder suddenly exploded in the air. Like a fog, it quickly spread out. Those who could escape from the battle hurriedly jumped away. No matter what it was better to avoid it. The people who were attacked by the wooden thorns thought that it was some kind of poison. They held their breath and waited until they blocked the wooden thorns and jumped out of the attack range. When they saw the light yellow smoke dissipate, they breathed again. When everything finally stopped, the leader looked at the people who were rolling on the ground and secretly said, "Trash?" His gaze shifted to a tree beside him. There were more than 10 thin wooden thorns nailed to it. He carefully moved over, and after making sure that nothing else was triggered, he quickly reached out and plucked a leaf. He wrapped it around a wooden thorn and pulled it out of the tree trunk. This was a wooden thorn from a plant in the mountains. The end of the wooden thorn still had some greenish-brown marks, indicating that it hadn't been long since it was pulled out. In the forest, there were many such plants, but many animals had rough skin and dry flesh. These wooden thorns weren't much of a threat to the animals with thick fur, but humans were different. They didn't have thick fur to protect them, nor did they wear armor. After being hit, they would be affected by the poison on the wooden thorns. Fortunately, the poison wasn't strong and wouldn't kill them. The tribesmen liked to use these little things. The leader sneered. However, who was the one who had set up the continuous attacks that were as dense as raindrops? Was it an ambush by others? Or was it the Yinjiao people who left? There was a faint sweet fragrance in the air. He didn't know if it was the fragrance of the flowers on the tree or something else. The leader threw away the wooden thorn in his hand and frowned. He glanced around with hazy eyes. Even after several rounds of attacks, they still couldn't find any traces of a trap. Keep chasing. Ignoring the people on the ground who were affected by the poison, the others planned to continue forward. Everyone be careful. Those tribesmen like to use these little things, the leader said. In their eyes, these were all little tricks made of wood and flowers. But after just 2 steps, they didn't know who stepped on something. But there was a short sound of rattling vines. Everyone's nerves suddenly tightened, and they clenched the weapons in their hands. The leader grabbed a bronze shield from one of the team members and vigilantly looked in the direction of the sound. However, they did not receive a new wave of wooden spikes. Instead, they saw a few strange wooden objects that resembled crescent moons fly out. Furthermore, they did not fly towards them. Instead, they flew in a direction far away from them. The flying wooden objects accurately passed through the gaps between the branches in the forest. They weren't blocked by the thick trunks and dense branches. Instead, they rushed out of the cover of the leaves and flew in an arc into the distance. Bang, bang, bang. They didn't know what the flying wooden objects hit, but when they heard the sound, the pursuers' hearts jumped and their nerves tightened again. After the wooden objects hit something, they flew in other directions. Then some dense whooshing sounds came. Realizing what it was, the leader shouted, "It's the leaf-piercing bee. Dodge!" Unlike the buzzing sound made by other mountain bees, the flying sound of the leaf-piercing bee was very special. It was similar to the whooshing sound of an arrow passing through. They were 2 to 3 times larger than ordinary bees and flew very fast. Because of the cone-shaped hard armor in front of their heads, they could easily pass through the leaves. Being stung by them, the consequences were much worse than the wooden thorns. There's actually a leaf-piercing bee's hive around here, the leader said angrily. The leaf-piercing bee generally didn't take the initiative to attack, but once it got angry, it was very aggressive. Moreover, the leaf-piercing bee's hive was very large. Almost every hive in the forest occupied a whole tree, so the number of bees was naturally large. Except for those beasts with thick skin who liked to steal honey and were talented, other beasts in the forest kept a respectful distance from the leaf-piercing bee's hive. And these pursuers obviously didn't expect that the Yinjiao people would take the path of the leaf-piercing bee. The wooden objects that flew out just now were targeted at the leaf-piercing bee's hive. The hive was attacked, and the leaf-piercing bees were angry. Just by listening to the sound of the leaves being passed through, one could know the mood of the leaf-piercing bee at this time. As soon as they heard that it was the leaf-piercing bee, the others in the team panicked and quickly spread out to distract the attention of the leaf-piercing bees. If those leaf-piercing bees went after the others, they could also escape this disaster. However, even if they spread out, there were always leaf-piercing bees chasing after them. It was the light yellow powder with a slightly sweet smell. Thinking of the reason, the leader was angry and aggrieved. If it was a head-on fight, then it was nothing. He was annoyed that the tribesmen's little tricks could kill people. Many of those leaf-piercing bees were slapped to the ground with a sword, but the more it was like this, the angrier the leaf-piercing bees were. The whooshing sound in the forest continued. A man touched the noose because he was trying to avoid the wasps and was hung up by his feet. Before he could use his sword to cut the vines, he was clamped by 2 large clamps with sharp stone awls on both sides, like the mouth of a giant beast. He didn't even have the chance to scream. In an instant the blood spread. Similar situations happen everywhere else. Some were tied up, some fell into the potholes, and then what greeted them was the real killing move. The whooshing sound of the leaf-piercing bees, the dense whooshing sound like rain, and the panic screams of the pursuers mixed together in the forest. At the foot of the mountain 2 groups of people were hurrying on. It was the Yinjiao and the Taiha tribe. They could hear a little of the movement on the mountain. Not only the Yinjiao people but the Taiha tribe people also glanced at Xiaoxian from time to time. They didn't know what Xiaoxian had done. After changing paths, Xiaoxian told them to hurry on with all their might, ignoring the traces left on the ground. Then Xiaoxian brought a few people to cover their backs. Before leaving, he asked the Taiha tribe people for some medicine. Because it was for the safety of the 2 teams, the Taiha tribe people didn't hide anything. They gave Xiaoxian everything he asked for. The powder that attracted the leaf-piercing bees was made by the Taiha people. They dared to walk near the leaf-piercing bee's nest because the Taiha people had a way to avoid the leaf-piercing bees. The team waited for a while at the foot of the mountain. Xiaoxian came back with people, but the expressions on the faces of the people who came back were very strange. Some were at a loss but some were looking forward to it. Duokong was one of them. He originally thought that Xiaoxian brought them to block the pursuers, but he didn't expect that when they reached the mountainside, Xiaoxian told them to stop and then assign tasks. They were to break wood thorns, cut wood, find vines, and then Xiaoxian carried his wooden box and continued to walk up the mountain with those things, starting to arrange them. Xiaoxian said that he could block the pursuers, but Duokong didn't believe it. Now that he heard the movement on the mountain, it might really be like what Xiaoxian said. Flap flap. A flock of birds flew over the team in the sky. Those birds. The Taiha tribesmen's eyes narrowed as they looked at the sky. Their gazes followed the birds, and they looked at the mountain behind them that was constantly moving. Those birds were scavenger birds. They could smell blood from far away and then follow the smell to find food. When hunting in the forest, they would also judge what was happening based on the movements of the scavenger birds. Now, the place where the scavenger birds were flying was the place where the Yinjiao people had set up the trap. Are those people all dead? Someone in the team asked Xiaoxian. It's not that easy, Xiaoxian replied. But after a few more times, there shouldn't be many left. A few more times, the Yinjiao people and the Taiha people looked up at Xiaoxian at the same time, then looked away and hurried on in silence. Chapter 397. The team didn't cover their tracks. Even if they did, they wouldn't be able to cover them completely, so they didn't bother. There were a few hundred people carrying goods in cauldrons. It was impossible for them to not leave a trace in the forest. After a while, Xiaoxian would set up some more traps. The Taiha people would also help. Their drugs would make Xiaoxian's traps even more pleasurable. As long as the people behind them continued to follow their footsteps, they could continue to enjoy themselves. If they could use skills to deal with the enemy, why would they need to use brute force? The Yanjiao and Taiha people were happy to see this. They didn't need to waste time and manpower to deal with the pursuers. They only needed to be on guard against the people who had been lying in ambush in the forest. This greatly reduced the pressure on them. 2 days later, the number of ambushes had decreased. They didn't see a single person after half a day. Duokong relaxed. It was finally over. From now on, they only needed to be on guard against the beasts in the mountains. Because of Xiaoxian's traps, the people behind them didn't catch up. Occasionally, they would see a flock of scavenger birds chirping as they flew overhead. Along the way, they saw Xiaoxian making stone tools. During the break, the people in the team were still in the mood to ask Xiaoxian how to use and make stone tools. If they were ever trapped in the forest and didn't have any other weapons, they could make stone tools to save themselves. Hearing Xiaoxian say that because their team had very few gold tools, they basically used stone tools. If it was before, everyone would have imagined a powerful image of a person holding a huge rock to smash a beast. However, after experiencing the events of the past 2 days, everyone realized that stone tools could also play a big role. It was not just the skill of smashing rocks. When they didn't have any metal tools, the brothers in the other team used all kinds of stone tools to deal with the beasts in the mountains. The brothers in the other team were really fierce. If there was a chance, they really wanted to meet them and have an in-depth discussion. As for the stones Xiaoxian mentioned, many people were confused. From their point of view, all stones looked the same. Guang Yi, who was face-blind, was the fastest learner in distinguishing stones. When the people of Yanjiao and Taiha returned to their tribes on the other side in Amba City, and Yen looked at a dozen people covered in blood and mud standing in front of him. He was so angry that his face turned green. With a flick of his hand, he threw the palm-sized wine cup on the ground. A bunch of trash. The person who was scolded stood there, trembling with fear. He lowered his head and did not say a word. This time they had indeed lost a lot of people. Encountering those continuous traps was one of them. They were also robbed by other tribesmen and suffered many casualties. Once they were out of Amba City, the other tribesmen put away their smiles. Whatever they could rob, it didn't matter if they were from the 6 tribes of Amba or anyone else. The immediate benefits were the most important. Because of the trap, many of the people in Yen sent out were injured. They were also taken advantage of. He sent out more than 100 people, but in the end only a dozen came back. How could Yen not be angry? It was like being pressed by a big stone in the chest. It was so stuffy that he wanted to vomit blood. The Yanjiao people didn't get the remaining crystal stones in their hands, and they didn't even get the bronze cauldron back. Why did Yen easily give away such a big bronze cauldron as a gift? One was to attract hatred. Giving it away in front of so many people in the free trading area would definitely attract more people's attention to the Yanjiao tribe's trading team. Of course, and Yen was happy to borrow other people's hands to cause trouble for the Yanjiao people. The second reason was to use the bronze cauldron to delay the Yanjiao people's pace. It was definitely inconvenient to carry such a big cauldron in the mountains and forests. It would also leave traces of walking, making it easier to track. But the result was like a loud slap, mercilessly slapping Yen in the face. Bronze was still very rare to the tribesmen, and the casting process was complicated. Every cauldron, especially those large ones, required a lot of manpower and material resources. Because of its rarity, it had always been exclusive to the slave masters since its creation. Moreover, it was only owned by the leaders of the 6 tribes. Those with lower status in the city did not have the ability to own one at all. Most people could only use pottery cauldrons. Of course, as the descendant of the leader, Yen had the right to give cauldrons to others, but to give it to the tribesmen? Yen really didn't think about this. Even if it was a failed casting cauldron, he didn't want to give it to the tribesmen directly. He only wanted to use it as a chess piece. But he didn't expect that this chess piece would be snatched away. How could he expect the tribesmen to spit out something that was taken back? Bang! Probably because he felt that the bronze wine cup wasn't enough to vent his anger. And Yen smashed an exquisitely made ceramic cup with an extremely thin body. Get out! Seeing these people standing in front of him, and Yen was angry. If it weren't for the fact that he still needed these people after losing so many people, he would have already dragged these wastes out and beheaded them. The next time the Yinjiao people came to Amba City's free trade area, he would definitely teach them a lesson. Unfortunately, what Yen didn't know was that the Yinjiao people had already made a deal with Black Bear, and didn't need to run to the free trade area. By the time the Yinjiao and Taiha teams returned to the tribe, the weather in the mountain forest had obviously turned cold. Standing at a high place, they could see the yellowed leaves everywhere in the mountain forest. It wouldn't be long before those leaves completely fell, and at that time winter would come. After going out to trade, the Taiha tribe people learned one thing. It was better not to provoke Yinjiao's little elder. He could fight head-on. Playing dirty? He could still do it. Especially the few people who fought Xiaoxian before. They were glad that Xiaoxian didn't trap them at that time. Otherwise, they would have been tortured to death or angered to death. After parting with the Taiha people, Duokong led the team back to the tribe with a smile on his face. The big cauldron that reflected the golden light was also carried by Duokong. At this time there was no need to hide it. He lifted the cloth to reveal the body of the cauldron, which was quite eye-catching. Looking at Duokong, who couldn't wait to jump up and show off with the cauldron, Guangyi pursed his lips and called for the others to follow. Walking through the forest, they saw the river outside the tribe. On the other side of the river, Chief Zheng Luo led the tribe people and stood there to welcome the trading team. The big cauldron Duokong carried almost blinded the eyes of the people who came to welcome them. Zheng Luo's first reaction when he saw the big cauldron was disbelief. He closed his eyes and opened them again. Duokong was still carrying the shining cauldron with a grin on his face. If they didn't exchange for something useful, how could they exchange for a big cauldron? And it was a flat one. If they used it to cook, it wouldn't even be as good as the big stone pot left by their ancestors. Seeing that the cauldron was unstable, Zheng Luo's expression darkened. What's going on? Zheng Luo went forward to ask. If Duokong had exchanged for this cauldron with weapons, he would immediately call for a tribal meeting and remove Duokong from his position as chief. Duokong put down the cauldron and shook his arms to loosen his muscles. Then he smiled and said, "You mean this cauldron? It's Xiaoxian's." When he heard that it was Xiaoxian's, Zheng Luo's expression stiffened. His questioning expression softened. He was about to reprimand Duokong for not advising Xiaoxian to exchange for the cauldron when Duokong briefly explained the situation. After hearing this, Zheng Luo put away his dissatisfaction and stroked his beard. He smiled and said, "Since it's a gift, just accept it. Who wouldn't accept something that was delivered to their doorstep?" As the chief of the tribe, Zheng Luo obviously thought of more things. To the slave masters, this cauldron was not something that could be casually given away. He could already guess in Yan's expression now. They went for wool and came home shorn. They deserved it. They deserved it for showing off. When he heard that Duokong was working with Black Bear, Zheng Luo smiled even harder. He said, "Good, good, good." Zheng Luo, who was in a good mood, called Xiaoxian up the mountain and gave him some linen and silk fabrics. While you were out, another team from the tribe went to trade with other tribesmen. "I have a lot here, take some with you." Although ramie and other textile materials were rough, they were cheap and easy to obtain. Everyone used them more, but silk fabrics were rarely used. The slave masters really liked those glossy and smooth fabrics. After giving Xiaoxian some linen and silk fabrics, Zheng Luo asked Xiaoxian about the trade. Duokong only gave a brief explanation. He wanted to know more about the details. When he finished, Zheng Luo looked at the cauldron he brought back. Cloud pattern flat cauldron. "It should be made by the Xia people," Zheng Luo said. Xia people? Xiaoxian didn't know much about this. Yes, it used to be the Xia tribe. The Xia people were good at casting. After the tribe split up, the Xia people used Gongjia as their surname and made a living by casting. Many cauldrons in Amba City were made by them. The Xia people's style is mainly round cauldrons and cloud patterns. In recent years they have more flat cauldrons. The 6 tribes are now casting cauldrons. Most of them are round cauldrons, followed by square cauldrons, and flat cauldrons are the least common. More than half of the round cauldrons and flat cauldrons are made by the Xia people. Plus, the Xia people like cloud patterns and not beast patterns, so this cauldron should be made by the Xia people. But I don't know why this cauldron failed. Zheng Luo looked at the flat body of the cauldron and then at its feet, puzzled. Since he couldn't figure it out, Zheng Luo stopped thinking about it. He said to Xiaoxian, "You can decide on this cauldron. You can melt it or keep it for your own soup." Xiaoxian carried the cauldron out of Zheng Luo's place. When he returned home, he put the cauldron in his stone crafting room. It was big enough and spacious enough for him to study the patterns on the cauldron. The words on the cauldron were a little cryptic and ancient. If it were anyone else, they probably wouldn't be able to read or understand, but Xiaoxian could still understand some of it. The usage of the language here had more or less changed after 1,000 years. There were some differences in the usage of words and grammar. What Xiaoxian learned from the people in the desert was actually the usage of the language here from 1,000 years ago. It was closer to the ancient method on the cauldron. Xiaoxian wrote all the words on the body of the cauldron on a piece of cloth for later study. But when Xiaoxian finished writing those words and looked at the cauldron standing there crookedly, he felt that the patterns on the body of the cauldron were a little strange. It was like a whirlpool attracting people's attention. Chapter 398. Many people thought that the decorative patterns on the cups and other objects were purely for the sake of looking good or acting as a symbol. Xiaoxian used to think so too. But the more he came into contact with these things, the more Xiaoxian found that there were many mysterious things in them. Just like the cauldron in front of him, Xiaoxian thought that what was displayed on the cauldron was all about the achievements of a slave owner in Amba City or other heroic deeds, or records of some memorable things. But when he carefully observed it, he found that there were many things that he could not understand. Yes, just these words did contain some of the glorious history of Amba City. Although there were a few words that Xiaoxian could not understand, it did not affect his understanding of those words. They were words of praise for the ancient Amba tribe, as well as a few congratulatory words. If it was just these, it would be fine, but the cloud patterns on the cauldron that seemed to act as decoration or background always gave Xiaoxian a very strange feeling. Many tribes like this kind of cloud pattern. The Hui tribe that he came into contact with also liked to use cloud patterns, probably because these vortex-shaped cloud patterns could not only be used as decoration and filling, but also had a sense of complexity and mystery in the structure. They were free and had a variety of styles. This cloud pattern flat-footed cauldron had a more delicate and complex cloud pattern on the upper end. Each cloud pattern vortex rolled towards the center, some like rolling clouds, some like flowing clouds. What was composed of many cloud patterns was not a simple two-sided structure that repeatedly overlapped up and down, but was combined in a more natural way. It was much more complex than the cloud pattern used by the Hui tribe. It was also the most complex but most natural cloud pattern Xiaoxian had ever seen. At first glance, the pattern was quite beautiful. Although it was not as attractive as the larger characters on the body of the cauldron, as long as one saw the cloud pattern, they would be attracted to it. It was an indescribable visual impact. As decorations, their purpose had been achieved, but was that really all? Xiaoxian stared at the patterns on the body of the cauldron for a while. He wanted to copy the complex and dense cloud patterns, but there was no paper around. Using cloth was too extravagant. Xiaoxian got up and went out to find some wide and long leaves. He then painted some paint on the cloud patterns on the body of the cauldron, and used the leaves to print the patterns on the leaves. After that, Xiaoxian copied the cloud patterns on a piece of cloth. Not only were there cloud patterns on the body of the cauldron, but there were also cloud patterns on the 3 flat legs of the cauldron. However, unlike the fine and complicated cloud patterns on the body of the cauldron, the cloud patterns on the flat legs were much thicker and more concise. Xiaoxian also imprinted the cloud patterns on the flat feet, one by one, and studied them slowly. Zheng Luo said that the cauldron was made by the Xia people. The Xia people liked to use cloud patterns. According to what Xiaoxian knew, cloud patterns were one of the earliest patterns. It seemed that every tribe that used cloud patterns had a very long history. Yanjiao's flame patterns were also created early. However, in terms of usage, they were not as widespread as the cloud patterns. Because the cloud patterns were balanced, There was a sense of movement and harmony. When two sides overlapped, the patterns would not appear abrupt. However, the cloud patterns on the cauldron made by the Xia people seemed to contain more. Since there was nothing else to do and it was almost winter, Xiaoxian would have more free time to study these. After copying all the cloud patterns on the body of the cauldron onto 2 pieces of cloth, Xiaoxian went to the shamaness to ask about some older languages. However, the shamaness did not know much. She could only read about things from hundreds of years ago from the records of her ancestors. However, most of the records passed down by Yinjiao's ancestors were written by the shamaness. Most of the language used was also from the other side and not the local language. Since he could not get the help he wanted from the shamaness, Xiaoxian could only think about it on his own. Thinking about these cloud patterns, Xiaoxian felt as if he had returned to the time when he was studying the conclusion. Everything in the world was full of order and rules. Whether it was the wild beasts in the forest or the people in various places, the physiological functions of the body also operated normally because of order. A person's sense of hearing, smell, and other bodily functions acted on the brain for a long time. It had a subtle influence on people's creations, which led to the creation of various arts and skills. This sense of order was also fully reflected in the symbols and patterns created. For example, the cloud patterns that Xiaoxian was looking at now. There were many but not messy. The person who created such a complicated and natural cloud pattern must have pursued a sense of balance and order in his creation. Only in this way could the cloud patterns on the body of the cauldron be produced. Then, under order, what did such a complicated combination of cloud patterns represent? Xiaoxian stared at the cloud patterns for a day, but could not figure out anything. After thinking about it, Xiaoxian went to the forest to pick up some leaves. The leaves that fell on the ground had already turned yellow, but they had not withered. The leaves were wider, and each one was larger than an adult's palm. They were also thicker. After picking up the leaves, he dried them under the sun and stored them for later use. At the same time, Xiaoxian also made a square sand table. The sand table was not deep, about 1 square meter in size. Xiaoxian picked up a branch and drew on the sand table. The combination of the complex cloud patterns seemed too difficult. Xiaoxian tried to divide the cloud patterns into several pieces and draw them on the sand table. Every time he separated a cloud pattern, he would draw a single cloud pattern on a leaf. After spending 5 days, Xiaoxian finished disassembling the cloud patterns on the cauldron. It was only a preliminary disassembly. He did not know if it was correct or not. Because there was no comparison, no one could tell Xiaoxian whether it was correct or not. Art existed in exaggeration and rendering, and the artistry of the pattern made it much more difficult for Xiaoxian to disassemble it. After thinking for 5 days, in addition to eating, drinking, and going to the toilet, all the time was spent on disassembling. When he finally finished drawing the last cloud pattern, Xiaoxian was tired. With dark circles under his eyes, he ate a large pot of mountain fruit and meat soup. After a good sleep, he walked out of the house. Although the yangguang outside was not as bright as before, for Xiaoxian, who had been cooped up in the house for 5 days, it was a bit dazzling. After recovering from his trance, Xiaoxian planned to go to other places at the foot of the mountain to relax. It was not necessarily beneficial to be tense all the time. Maybe he could get some inspiration by walking around. Recently, the temperature had dropped sharply. Almost every day, the temperature difference from the day before could be felt. Looking into the distance from the mountain, a lot of yellow trees could be seen 5 days ago, but now they were much thinner. Recently, the people who went out to trade had all returned. Not only did Duokong bring people to trade in Amba City, but there were also people who went to other tribes to trade silk fabrics and other things. Some of the hunted meat was hanging outside to dry. Walking down the road, Xiaoxian saw many beast heads and legs hanging in front of every house. Seeing a familiar figure, Xiaoxian shouted, "Zhao Ming, what are you doing?" Zhao Ming, who was carrying fruit into the house, looked in Xiaoxian's direction and said happily, "Xiaoxian, elder." Xiaoxian looked at the fruits wrapped in big leaves. These were all kinds of fruits that were rarely eaten in the tribe. He asked, "What are these for? To make soup?" Some fruits were not eaten directly. The tribesmen used them as seasonings to make soup. "No, these are for the tapers." Speaking of this, Zhao Ming's face was red. Xiaoxian remembered that he brought back a nest of tapers from hunting. Both the big ones and the small ones were brought back in a net bag for Xiaoming to raise. "Where's your brother?" "Not at home." Xiaoxian scanned the house and did not see any adults. He went to chop wood with the others. Xiaoming brought Xiaoxian to see the tapers he raised. The little tapers were bigger than when Xiaoxian brought them back. Their fur had grown thicker. The colder the weather, the more fur these tapers would have to protect them from the cold. When they saw Xiaoxian come over, they all squeezed towards the mother model. The big ones and the small ones all nested in the corner with branches and dried grass. "They're quite energetic. You raise them well. You can eat them when they're a little bigger." Xiaoxian looked at the tapers and said, "Xiaobi's mother said that these tapers will grow faster after winter. They don't eat much in winter, so they grow slower." Xiaoming thought of something and said happily to Xiaoxian, "But when they grow up, I won't eat them anymore." "Why?" Xiaoxian was confused. Didn't these little kids always drool when they saw the wild animals in captivity? Why wouldn't they eat them? Xiaoming smiled, showing his white teeth. He did not speak, but faint patterns appeared on his face. The patterns were gradually deepening. It was not as fast as Xiaoxian's, but it was definitely deepening steadily. Totemic patterns. Xiaoxian was shocked, then smiled. "Congratulations, you're about to become a totemic warrior." Although he had heard about it from others, it was Xiaoxian's first time seeing a tribesman who did not awaken during the ceremony. Perhaps this was the difference brought by the disappearance of the fire seed. The fire seed had been integrated into every Yinjiao's bloodline. As long as they reached the boundary of awakening, the fire seed in their bloodline could help them awaken at any time. There was no need to wait for the ceremony. As for why Xiaoming said he would not eat tapers, of course it was because once he became a totemic warrior, he could eat higher-level beasts such as fearsome beasts. Even if he could not eat them, he could exchange them for other things. It was not a loss. After walking around the foot of the mountain, Xiaoxian was called up by Guangyi, who was carrying a large bundle of firewood. Before this, Xiaoxian did not go out. He looked like he was busy with something, so no one bothered him. Now that Xiaoxian had come out, they called him up the mountain to talk. After spending so much time together, Guangyi, who had face blindness, finally had an impression of Xiaoxian. Although Xiaoxian's face was still blurry, he could recognize Xiaoxian just by looking at the bone ornaments Xiaoxian wore. Winter is coming. The shamaness said it will start snowing in 3 days. The chief has been discussing the winter hunt for the past 2 days, Guangyi said to Xiaoxian. Usually when winter started there would not be heavy snow. The tribe would organize a hunt, and when it started snowing they would not go out. After going up the mountain, Duokong asked Xiaoxian if he wanted to go for the winter hunt. The winter hunt had its dangers. Not everyone was suited for it. "I'll go," Xiaoxian said. He wanted to use this opportunity to hunt a better prey to make a ceremonial animal robe for the ceremony. Winter here was not long. After the end of winter, there would be the most important ceremony of the year. This was also the first ceremony Xiaoxian attended since he came here. Chapter 399. After the snowfall, the forest was covered with a layer of white. Xiaoxian went out to hunt with the hunting team. Most of the beasts were thick-skinned but hairless. They rarely came out in the winter, so most of the beasts they hunted were hairy, which could be made into fur coats. Because of the participation of Xiaoxian, the elder, many people participated in the winter hunt. Everyone was very enthusiastic. In addition to hunting, Xiaoxian also went to the dry riverbed to fish some stones back. When he was free, he would make some glowing crystals for everyone to use. The winter night would be darker, so the crystals would make it easier for everyone to move around. During the winter hunt, Xiaoxian hunted a hairy giant beast, which he used as a sacrificial animal clothing. When the snowfall in the forest increased, the people in the tribe stopped going out. The river around the tribe was also frozen, so there was no need to build a bridge. They could walk directly on the river. The children in the tribe liked to play on the river. For the people in the tribe, winter meant boredom. Every day, they would gather in groups of 3 to 5 to exercise their muscles and bones, and teach the new warriors. Since they couldn't go out to hunt, they could only use other ways to vent their energy. Xiaoxian spent most of his time in the house studying the cloud patterns. Occasionally, he would come out for some exercise and then he would study again. Sometimes, he would ask the craftsmen in the tribe for advice. Their craftsmanship came from their ancestors, who learned it from them, and then summed up their own experience and passed it down from generation to generation. They had a good understanding of the casting and forging styles of each faction, and had a lot of contact with the works of the Xia people. However, the craftsmen in the tribe didn't know much about the cloud patterns that Xiaoxian asked about. The craftsmen did give Xiaoxian some handwritten notes from their ancestors. Because the craftsmen sorted them out by themselves, they were messier than the ones left by the shaman. Some of them were missing parts or they weren't clear. Xiaoxian could barely read them. In order to express his gratitude, Xiaoxian gave them a few glowing water sunstones, which made the craftsmen very happy. He spent the winter studying cloud patterns and making water sunstones. When Xiaoxian heard the cheers outside, he realized that winter had already passed. Winter came late here, and the days where they couldn't hunt weren't long. This made Xiaoxian unable to react when he heard the noise outside. It's over so quickly. Xiaoxian stood up and shook the leaves off his body. He pushed the door open and walked out. Because of Xiaoxian, some families in the tribe also used the water sunstone. Even on a moonless night, other than the light from the fire, some sparkling lights could be seen. And now, the two crescent moons that had disappeared in the sky had reappeared. From now on, the sky would be illuminated by them for the next year. The moon came out and winter was over. The most important thing for the tribe was to offer sacrifices. They were in different places, but the time was synchronized. There was no such thing as day on one side and night on the other. No matter which Yanjiao tribe it was, they all used the moon in the sky as a reference. It was just that they didn't know if the exact time was the same. The shamaness finalized the time and announced it. The tribe began to get busy preparing for the sacrifice. Xiaoxian was the only elder of the two tribes. His position was second only to the shamaness and the chief. Of course, he had a lot of weight in the sacrifice. In the past year, the awakened warriors would sit closer to the front during the sacrifice. Because from today onwards, they would officially become part of the tribe's combat power. Even if they couldn't start hunting immediately and needed to go through a period of adaptation and training, they should have the awareness to become strong. They couldn't continue to play around like children all day long. When night fell, all the tribe members gathered. The fire in the fire pit had been lit by the shamaness. Xiaoxian, the shamaness and the chief stood closest to the fire pit. Looking at the fire in the fire pit, as the shamaness chanted, Xiaoxian suddenly had a feeling that there was also a fire on the other side far away. He couldn't help but look in that direction. Far away on the other side of the sea, in the old haunt of the fearsome beast mountain forest, it should also be the day of the sacrifice. There was no communication, but their hearts were connected. The shamaness originally wondered if the ancestral bone ornaments would appear again in today's sacrifice. But as she chanted, she found that the fire in the fire pit was especially active today. It was even more vigorous than the day they welcomed Xiaoxian. What was going on? The shamaness shared some of her attention and focused on the fire pit. Since the fire seed disappeared, the fire pit had only changed greatly twice. The first time was when they welcomed Xiaoxian last year, and the second time was now. Whoosh, the fire rose without wind. It was like a giant beast waking up from hibernation, waving its sharp claws and roaring. The fire rolled up, and the totem of the two horns appeared clearly. This time, it was much clearer than last year's ceremony to welcome Xiaoxian. This change also surprised the tribesmen who were paying attention to the fire pit. They had never seen such a change before. But Xiaoxian had seen it before, and more than once. The first of the three flames of the fire pit, soaring flame. As if to confirm Xiaoxian's guess soon, the fire in the fire pit rose up in an instant. At the same time, many flames flew out from the fire pit. The fire was fainter than the one in Xiaoxian's memory. It was not so much a flame but a reflection of the flame. Looking at the sparks in the fire pit and the flames flying out one after another, the tribesmen were stunned and didn't know what to do. This is... The shamaness looked at the scene in front of her and murmured. This time she had a guess. She suddenly turned her eyes to Xiaoxian, wanting to get an answer from Xiaoxian. The second flame of the fire pit, soaring flame. Xiaoxian whispered. Synchronized. The fire pits on both sides were synchronized. Even across the sea, even though the situation on both sides was different at this moment at tonight's ceremony, the fire pits on both sides were synchronized. On the 4 bone ornaments worn by Xiaoxian, the crimson beads emitted flames. Like last time, the eruption of flames wrapped around the surroundings and then formed a flame giant that rose from the ground. Because of the previous experience, everyone was a bit calmer this time. They were only shocked by the floating flames that looked like shadows. This was the first time in their lives that they had seen it. It was strange, but there was an inexplicable sense of intimacy in the bottom of their hearts. The tall flame giant slowly turned around and looked in one direction, which was also the direction Xiaoxian was looking at before. At the same time, in another place far away, in the ferocious Beast Mountain forest, the Yinjiao tribesmen at tonight's ceremony were worried about Xiaoxian, who had disappeared for a long time. Since Xiaoxian's disappearance in the desert, the shamaness had sent people to investigate. It took a lot of effort to find out that Xiaoxian had been hunted down and jumped into the sea. He hadn't been seen since then. Because of this, the Yinjiao tribe had almost started a war in the desert. But later, everyone was called back by the shamaness. Xian is still alive. The shamaness held the box containing the elder's bone ornaments and told everyone with certainty. Tonight, many people thought of Xiaoxian, but they didn't expect a flame giant to suddenly appear in the fire pit. If Xiaoxian was here, the flame giant would have calmed them down. But now Xiaoxian wasn't here. The flame giant that appeared didn't have any other reaction because of the kneeling crowd. The huge figure formed by the flame slowly turned in one direction. The shamaness looked at the light emitted from the box containing the elder's bone ornaments and was so excited that her hands trembled, almost shaking the ornaments out of the box. He found them. Xian must have found them. The others didn't understand what the shamaness meant. They only knew that Xiaoxian was still alive. That was enough. When will he return? The shamaness asked in a trembling voice. The others thought that she was talking about Xiaoxian, but Chief Ao knew that she wasn't talking about just Xiaoxian. After the sacrificial ceremony, no matter which branch they were from, their hearts were not at peace. The Yinjiao people in Fearsome Beast Forest were wondering when Xiaoxian would return. The shamaness and Chief Ao were wondering if Xiaoxian had really found the other Yinjiao people. On the other side of the sea, everyone was wondering what the flame giant was looking at, and what the ancestor was trying to convey. Some people guessed the reason and couldn't sleep that night. Chief Zheng Luo sent a team with Xiaoxian to the shore where Xiaoxian had come ashore to see if there was a passage under the sea. But they returned in disappointment. Xiaoxian didn't even see the passage that he had come from, let alone a safe passage. They probably didn't meet at the right time. Even if they did, Xiaoxian felt that other than himself, there might not be many people who could safely pass through there. It was impossible not to be disappointed. Even though this place had a rich culture and they could live well here, Xiaoxian still wanted to go back and take the Yinjiao people with him. Building a ship? With their current technology, they might not be able to build a ship that could support such a long journey. There were also many giant beasts in the sea. One tail could overturn them all. The danger was no less than the passage under the sea. After thinking about it, Xiaoxian felt that if the bridge under the sea could be raised, then everyone could go from one continent to another just like they did 1,000 years ago. Unfortunately, he didn't have the ability. Forget it, he would wait for another chance. Or maybe he would find another way. By the time they returned to the tribe from the shore, the weather was already warm. Some people had already started to try planting in the small fields of the tribe. Even if they didn't plant much, as long as they could produce something to relieve the pressure of food, it was worth it. Besides, the shamaness had told everyone that hunting was important, but so was planting. This skill could not be neglected. There was still some time before the next hunt. Looking at the people working in the fields, Xiaoxian asked some experienced growers some questions. He remembered that he still had some things in his hands. Xiaoxian still had some of the 1,000 gold grains that he and Jiju had stolen from the rats. He had thought about planting them when he brought them back, but it was already the end of the year and he had other things to do. Xiaoxian didn't think about it anymore. He took out the bag of grains. These grains had been dried by Xiaoxian. They didn't look as bright as before, and the husks were a little dark. Looking at these dark golden grains, Xiaoxian put them away and took them to find experienced growers. In this climate they should be able to try planting, right? Chapter 400. The weather was getting warmer and the air was humid. But when the sun came out, the humid air was gone. Xiaoxian took the small bag of grains down the mountain and went to the tribe's farmland to discuss it with someone. A few days ago, he asked an elder in the tribe who was good at farming. He planned to bring the grains to the elder today and ask for his opinion and suggestions. Xiaoxian knew about farming, but after coming to this world, he didn't recognize most of the plants because they didn't even exist in the other world. Not only that, but after coming to this world, Xiaoxian was blind again. Although he knew some, the main crops here were different from what Xiaoxian knew. Their growth habits were also very different. Xiaoxian could only ask someone who was more experienced. Most of the tribe's farmland was at the foot of the mountain. From the mountainside to the foot of the mountain, there were plots of land. Each plot was planted by several families. As for how the land was distributed after planting, the tribe didn't care. Xiaoxian came to a plot of land near the foot of the mountain. An old woman with a head of silver hair was sitting there. Her name was Chi-Chi. Her mother was from the Taihe tribe. The Taihe tribe was better at farming than the Yanjiao tribe. They had a better grasp of many techniques, so Chi-Chi knew more about farming. The people who worked in the fields often came to ask her questions. "You're here." Chi-Chi saw Xiaoxian and quickly stood up. In many tribes, people had to pay their respects to people of high status. Yanjiao also had this kind of etiquette on important occasions, but it was usually more casual. Chi-Chi obviously still felt that she had to bow to Xiaoxian. But as soon as she stood up, Xiaoxian stopped her. Xiaoxian didn't say much. He took out the bag and poured out a few grains. "Take a look at this." Chi-Chi's attention immediately shifted to the dark gold grains in Xiaoxian's hand. These were grains that she had never seen before. After taking a closer look, Chi-Chi shook her head. "This is the first time I've seen such a grain. Is this the 1,000-grain gold you mentioned?" "Yes, that's it." Xiaoxian had told Chi-Chi where he found the 1,000-grain gold. After some consideration, Chi-Chi suggested that Xiaoxian find a place similar to where he found it. That way it would be safer. No one knew what kind of environment this plant liked to grow in. There were all kinds of plants. Some liked the sun, some liked the shade, some liked the humidity, and some liked the drought. They couldn't be lumped together. "However, elder, you can plant some in every place. When the time comes and you see which place has the best growth, you can plant them there." Thinking about how Xiaoxian said that these grains were extremely rare and precious, Chi-Chi paused. Since it was rare and precious, how could she waste it like she did with other seeds? But looking at the dark gold grains in Xiaoxian's hand, Chi-Chi's heart itched. She wanted to try planting these rare grains. As someone who had been farming since young, these few grains were very attractive. Even if she hadn't eaten them before, she could give a rough evaluation just by looking at them and smelling them. They were very attractive. But Xiaoxian was an elder and these grains were very precious. She couldn't ask for them. Sensing Chi-Chi's gaze, Xiaoxian thought about the 1,000 grains in his hand and counted 100 for her. "If you have time, can you help me plant these?" For someone as experienced as Chi-Chi, it would save Xiaoxian a lot of trouble. It was better than Xiaoxian messing around. Chi-Chi hurriedly promised, of course. "Don't worry, elder, I will do my best." As she spoke, she took out a cloth bag and carefully took the 100 grains from Xiaoxian. She decided to discuss this with her fellow farmers first. They would carry out their plan after they came up with a plan. If she succeeded, she would definitely get more benefits from Xiaoxian. But to Chi-Chi, the most important thing was that she could try planting something so rare. This would give her a sense of achievement. After giving the grains to Chi-Chi, Xiaoxian looked at the people working in the field. Everyone used many types of farming tools, such as plowing, watering, harvesting, threshing, etc. Many of them learned from the slave masters in the 6 tribes. They were very useful in plowing, planting, processing, etc. These tools were mostly made of wood and stone. It was said that the slave masters used bronze tools. But in the tribe, no one could bear to use bronze tools. Stones and animal bones were also good substitutes. After looking at them for a while, Xiaoxian went back to find some materials and improved the tools. He even made a plow for them to cultivate the land. Xiaoxian's plow was simpler than what he had planned because of the limited tools. It was also made of wood and stone. After a few attempts, he improved and perfected the plow to make it lighter and easier to turn around. It was easy to operate and its flexibility was satisfactory. This way the efficiency of farming would also increase. After making it, Xiaoxian went to show it to the farmers and taught them how to use it. Perhaps the slave masters already had similar farming tools, but this was the first time the people in the tribe had seen it. They felt it was new and very happy. As soon as Xiaoxian brought the plow over, everyone surrounded it. "Elder, what is this? Can this be used for farming?" Everyone was curious. The plow was a farming tool. Usually it was tied to the animal that pulled it, such as a cow. But there were no domesticated animals here, so it could only be pulled by humans. Luckily, the Yanjiao tribe had a lot of manpower, so it was easy for them to use it. That's it. Use it to break up the soil and make trenches. I saw that everyone was busy preparing for the planting of seeds. This plow should make it easier for everyone. After the demonstration, Xiaoxian gave the plow to the others to try it out. Many people wanted to try it, but it was snatched away by Chi-Chi's granddaughter. Jiling was only 15 or 16 years old. She was as beautiful as a flower and had already awakened her totemic power. She had just returned from a hunt a few days ago, so it wasn't her turn to patrol. She had nothing to do, so she came to help Chi-Chi. She didn't expect to see Xiaoxian with the plow. She rolled up her sleeves and squeezed the others to the side. She copied Xiaoxian and started to plow. Another middle-aged woman helped from behind. Jiling stopped when she came across a rock in the ground. She didn't use a knife. Instead, she reached out and dug out a rock the size of Winter. She didn't even look at it. With a toss, she threw the rock far away. Xiaoxian saw the rock the size of a winter melon draw an arc in the sky. It flew over the river in front of the tribe and landed in the forest far away, startling a few birds. He turned his head and looked at the field again. Jiling was pulling the plow while sharing the feeling of pulling the plow with a few hunting companions who were rubbing their palms together. Xiaoxian was speechless. In the tribe, women were like men, and men were like ferocious beasts. Those who worked in the fields weren't all people who hadn't awakened their totemic power. Most of the time, totemic warriors were the ones who did the hard work. After all, they didn't have hunting shifts every day. Girls like Jiling, who Xiaoxian thought looked like a flower, also worked in the fields like the others. In the tribe, there were two kinds of people. One was the weak group who hadn't awakened their totemic power, and the other was the warriors who had awakened their totemic power. At this time, many people were busy sowing seeds. Xiaoxian didn't know until now that other than the fields in the tribe, there were also people who were planting seeds in the forest on the other side of the river. However, unlike the meticulous planting in the tribe, they were more casual in the forest, and still used the primitive method of burning sticks. First, cut down the weeds, vines, and bushes in the forest, and then set fire to them. After the rain, when the soil was wet and soft, they did not plow or dig. Instead, they planted some seeds, and the burned vegetation became fertilizer for these seeds. When sowing seeds, the people in the front poked holes in the ground with spears or other tools, and the people behind would put the seeds into the holes. After planting, they didn't take much care of it. Sometimes they would go over to take a look, or chase away the birds and beasts. After all, their main source of food was hunting, followed by the fields in the tribe. As for the fields outside the tribe, they were just there to pass time. As long as they harvested more than what they sowed, they would be satisfied. After harvesting what they planted, they would move to another place, and the original plot of land would be idle. They would wait for a few years or even longer before moving back to plant again. There was a lot of land here and the forest was big, so they could afford it. Xiaoxian didn't plant the seeds in the fields, nor did he go outside the tribe. He used a wooden fence to enclose a 70 square meters of empty land behind the house. After doing some preliminary work, he planted 100 grains. The 1,000-grain gold was discovered on the top of the mountain. Xiaoxian lived on the top of the mountain, not far from the top. Although the mountain wasn't high, Xiaoxian didn't feel safe planting it on other mountains. After all, there were too many birds and beasts on other mountains, and Xiaoxian couldn't keep an eye on them all the time. Different mountains had different climates and geology, but Xiaoxian didn't think too much about it. He just wanted to try it out. Speaking of which, he wasn't very interested in planting the 1,000-grain gold, and wasn't obsessed with it. It would be good if he could plant it, but if he couldn't, he would just cook the remaining grains and eat them. After so long, he should still be able to eat them. After a while, the seeds behind Xiaoxian's house sprouted. Out of 100 seeds, more than half of them had sprouted. Xiaoxian was very satisfied with this. But when Xiaoxian was called over by Qi, he realized that most of the grains had already sprouted 2 to 3 leaves. With 100 grains, the survival rate was more than 90%. It was much better than the ones in Xiaoxian's backyard. She was indeed experienced. Seeing the seedlings, Xiaoxian was happy too. It didn't matter who planted them, as long as they were alive. Qi and the rest were even more excited to see the seedlings. Every day when they had time, they would go and look at the seedlings. They found spots from the top to the bottom of the mountain, and planted 10 grains in each spot. At this stage, the seedlings at the bottom of the mountain were growing the best. Chapter 401. On this day, Xiaoxian came back from a hunt and heard that the Taihe tribe was there. Although there were occasional conflicts between the two tribes, there were still interactions between them. After the trade trip at the end of last year, the relationship between the two tribes improved. They hadn't quarreled since then. At least the leaders of the two tribes didn't quarrel. Why are the Taihe people here? Xiaoxian asked the person beside him. I heard it's about farming. They're at the field. The person who spoke was obviously unhappy. The Taihe tribesmen were better at farming than the Flaming Horns. Everyone had to admit that the Taihe tribesmen could not only grow crops but also herbs. Every year, many of the herbs they brought to trade were actually grown by themselves. The Taihe tribesmen had a much larger area of land. Unlike the Flaming Horns, the Taihe tribesmen placed a lot of importance on farming. As for why the Taihe tribesmen came to visit the Flaming Horn tribe's fields, it was because the Taihe tribesmen had a sense of superiority when it came to farming. Every time they came, they would act arrogantly as if they were teaching the Flaming Horn tribe. This was the reason why there were so many small-scale arguments. But from the tribe's point of view, the shamans were happy to see this kind of academic exchange. Although there were arguments, it was worth it if the Yanjiao people could learn more. Thinking about the 1,000-grain gold that Qi planted, Xiaoxian put down his prey and walked towards the field. Xiaoxian didn't ask Qi to keep the 1,000-grain gold a secret. Qi even asked Xiaoxian if they should hide it if the Taihe people came. Xiaoxian refused. It would be better if he could get some useful advice from the Taihe people. He didn't have to worry about the Taihe people playing dirty. At least until now, the Taihe people hadn't done anything like that. After asking around, Xiaoxian went to a place near the mountainside. There were already many people there. Xiaoxian remembered that there was also a piece of land there that was used to plant the 1,000-grain gold. Qi was in a good mood today. In the past, when people from the Taihe tribe came, they would always give them some pointers. Their choice of words wasn't too tactful and they took pleasure in attacking them. It wasn't easy for them to find a way to attack the Yanjiao people, so they naturally wouldn't hold back. But today was different. Even though the Taihe people caught some mistakes, the incident with Li and the 1,000-grain gold distracted them. When Xiaoxian walked over, 2 Taihe tribesmen were discussing something around a plow. The others were with Qi, standing beside a specially fenced field. There were only a few seedlings in the field. As for the people around the fence, their eyes were shining as they looked at the seedlings. Seeing Xiaoxian walk over, Qi bowed as usual and introduced the people from the Taihe tribe. After being ridiculed so many times, Qi wanted to return the favor. When she introduced them, her expression seemed to be saying, "Look at these bumpkins, they haven't even seen a plow before." After being ridiculed by Qi, the Taihe tribesmen's expressions froze. It was rare that they didn't retort back. Instead, they quickly put on a smile, as if they were close relatives. One of them coughed and walked forward. Quan Bai from the Taihe tribe is here to make a deal with Elder Xiaoxian. At the end of last year, they had already heard about the glowing crystals from their trading team. They had sent people to probe the Flaming Horns a few times, but the Flaming Horns kept their mouths shut. They couldn't find out anything useful at all. This time, the chief had the intention of letting them trade with the Flaming Horns. They wanted to exchange some glowing crystals for them to take a look. Originally, they thought that if Xiaoxian wasn't here, they would look for someone else. The other Yinjiao tribesmen also had glowing crystals. They didn't expect to run into the Yinjiao hunting team today. You want the water sunstone? Of course, Xiaoxian said. But what do you want in exchange? What does Elder Xiaoxian want? Quanbai asked. Usually, in a trade between two tribes, bronze wares were rarely exchanged. Most of the time, animal hides or other items were used. Taiha tribe had more herbs. Quanbai thought that Xiaoxian would directly ask for precious herbs. But after thinking for a while, Xiaoxian said, "How are the craftsmen of the Taiha tribe?" Quanbai frowned. He didn't understand why Xiaoxian would suddenly ask this. Did he think that the craftsmen of the Yinjiao tribe weren't good enough and wanted to ask the craftsmen of the Taiha tribe to make bronze wares? In terms of craftsmen, the Taiha tribe was quite good. Thinking about this, Quanbai said proudly, "The craftsmen of my tribe are naturally very skilled. Although they aren't as good as the masters of the 6 tribes, they are still better than." Quanbai was about to say, better than Yinjiao when he saw Xiaoxian look over. He remembered that he had something to ask of him, so he changed the topic and looked at the other tribes with disdain. But they are still much better than the Fox tribe and the other tribes. As for how many tribes were included in the word other, he didn't say. Xiaoxian nodded and asked, "The Taiha tribe has passed down their craftsmen for thousands of years, right?" Quanbai's heart skipped a beat. Was this kid trying to steal their craftsmen? No way. Quanbai was cautious, but he didn't show it on his face. He only said, "Before Yinjiao came here, the Taiha tribe had already made our own tools. But compared to the people of the 6 tribes, we are still far behind. Can I talk to the craftsmen of your tribe? I have some questions." Quanbai and the other Taiha tribesmen were on guard. Xiaoxian said, "Don't worry, I'm not asking about craftsmen. I'm asking about other things." Quanbai and the others relaxed when they heard that he wasn't asking about craftsmen. But they were still on guard. Some things could be brought out for discussion, but other things should be kept in their hands. For example, they would never tell anyone about the cultivation methods of their tribe's precious herbs. Craftsmen were one of them. They could process it, but they wouldn't reveal anything about it. Seeing that Xiaoxian only wanted to talk to the craftsmen, the matter of the glowing crystals was settled. They could go back and report to the chief. But Quanbai and the others glanced at the few seedlings inside the fence. One of them poked Quanbai's back, signaling for him to bring it up. Quanbai thought for a moment and said to Xiaoxian, "Elder Xiaoxian, do you have any more 1,000-grain gold?" Xiaoxian glanced at them. "What? Do you want it?" "If you do, we would like to trade with Elder Xiaoxian." Quanbai's eyes were filled with anticipation. Quanbai had even pinched an inconspicuous part of the seedling when Chi-Chi wasn't paying attention. Then he sniffed it and tasted it. His eyes widened, but he suppressed the desire in his heart and tried his best to calm down and negotiate. "Sure, I'll make a decision after I talk to your craftsmen," Xiaoxian said. He wanted to talk to them before making a decision. Quanbai and the others panicked. Who knew how long this would take? If they missed the best time to plant the seeds, it would be a huge failure. They would be letting these people down. But Xiaoxian had made up his mind. He couldn't change it. They knew that Xiaoxian was forcing them to arrange an exchange with the craftsmen, but they had no choice but to follow. The Taiha tribesmen wanted to drag this out, but after a discussion, they arranged for an experienced craftsman to talk to Xiaoxian. Not only was this craftsman better than others in terms of skill, he also had to be smart. If he was a little stupid, he might accidentally let Xiaoxian use all his skills. Then it would be too late to cry. The craftsman had also done his best. He was extremely alert when he met with Xiaoxian. He was thinking about how to avoid the flaming horn elder if he brought up the matter of forging. What he didn't expect was that Xiaoxian didn't ask about the craftsmanship but about the Xia people. Since it wasn't about forging, the craftsman relaxed and told him what he knew. As for the cloud pattern Xiaoxian mentioned, the craftsman didn't know much about it. Thinking of something, the craftsman said, "I remember that in the records left by my ancestors, there was something about the Xia people's cloud pattern." Xiaoxian was disappointed but perked up when he heard this. "Your ancestors studied the Xia people's cloud pattern?" The craftsman nodded. Seems so. But after they passed away, no one paid attention to the Xia people's cloud pattern. In fact, the craftsmen of the Taiha tribe wanted to imitate the Xia people's products because they could sell for a high price. The Xia people's most typical cloud pattern was the complicated cloud pattern. But when it came to forging, they realized that the seemingly simple cloud pattern was extremely difficult to imitate. Just a little bit would result in a much worse product. Anyone with a discerning eye could tell that it was fake. The craftsmen studied for their entire lives but couldn't figure it out completely. But they did find some clues and wrote down their findings in the notes they left for their descendants. But the descendants of the Taiha tribe weren't interested in imitating other people's products. Gradually, they stopped paying attention to it and only glanced at the notes occasionally. To the Taiha people, the Xia people's cloud pattern belonged to other people and not their tribe, so it wasn't classified as a secret. These were items that could be traded. However, the notes couldn't be given out so easily. The craftsman promised to go back and sort out the notes and write a copy for Xiaoxian. When Xiaoxian saw the notes, he was overjoyed and gave him 3 glowing crystals. This was something that the Taiha tribe had already discussed. They even felt that they were getting a good deal. As for the 1,000 grain gold that Quan Bai and the others wanted, Xiaoxian took out 50 of them and the Taiha people exchanged for it with herbs. Xiaoxian asked Duokong to discuss the rest with them, while Xiaoxian took the notes back to study the cloud pattern. One had to admit that the craftsmen of Taiha had indeed wanted to carry on the path of imitation to the end. Unfortunately, they had kicked an iron door and could not open it. The cloud patterns of the Xia people looked simple, but it was always difficult to understand. Luckily, the notes they left behind inspired Xiaoxian. Although they couldn't completely decipher the cloud pattern, their ideas and the questions they answered made Xiaoxian's mind light up. In the following days, Xiaoxian locked himself in his room to decipher the Xia people's cloud pattern. Then Chi-Chi came to him dejectedly. Seeing Xiaoxian's bloodshot eyes, Chi-Chi was shocked. "Elder Xiaoxian, did you fail too?" "Fail what?" Xiaoxian rubbed his eyes and asked in confusion. "The things I planted." "Huh? Planted what?" "The 1,000 grain gold, of course." Xiaoxian. He was so busy deciphering the cloud pattern that he completely forgot about the 1,000 grain gold in his backyard. Chapter 402. Chi-Chi's words reminded Xiaoxian of the precious 1,000 grain gold in his backyard. It was said that the more precious something was, the more fragile it was and had to be protected. Xiaoxian sighed as he thought about the sprouts and the days he had been cooped up in his house. He no longer had any hope. When Chi-Chi saw Xiaoxian's reaction, she realized this elder had probably forgotten about the 1,000 grain gold and did not care at all. If it had been anyone else, Chi-Chi would have started scolding and beating them up. However, this was the elder of the tribe, second only to the chief and the shaman. He was also the owner of the 1,000 grain gold. She did not dare to scold him, much less beat him up. No matter how furious she was, she could only take a deep breath and suppress her emotions. Then again, her own crops had all failed. She had no right to criticize him. It was a pity that this young elder was too young and did not realize the importance of the 1,000 grain gold. Chi-Chi sighed. "Let's go take a look." Xiaoxian tidied up the thick, dry leaves beside him that served as a notebook, then brought Chi-Chi to the backyard. Previously, when he heard that Xiaoxian was planting some precious crops here, Duokong specially brought people over to wrap a piece of cloth around the wooden fence to prevent the naughty kids from kicking pebbles and other things inside. That was why these few days, not just Xiaoxian, even the people who walked past Xiaoxian's house every day couldn't see what was going on inside. Those who were curious did not dare to peek into Xiaoxian's house either. The elder's position was very powerful in this aspect. He had lost all hope, but when Xiaoxian opened the back door and looked into the yard, he realized that there were many green sprouts swaying in the wind. The last time Xiaoxian looked, only half of them had sprouted, but this time, there were more than 80 sprouts. The last 30 sprouts had probably sprouted later, so Xiaoxian did not notice them last time. The sprouts were not very tall, only a little taller than Xiaoxian's ankles. Although they were growing slowly and did not look very energetic, they were still alive. Chi-Chi looked at the small yard and the sprouts on the ground. She was so shocked she did not know what to do. She quickly walked forward and looked at the ground. Because no one had watered or fertilized them, some parts had cracked. Elder, how did you plant them? Qi asked Xiaoxian. I planted them like you did. You saw it the last time too. I watered them a little when they sprouted, but I did not use the fertilizer. Xiaoxian pointed at a vat in the corner. It was the fertilizer Qi had given him. Qi had told Xiaoxian to water the sprouts when they grew. But Xiaoxian had forgotten about it when he got busy. He had put all his attention on the cloud patterns and did not remember about the sprouts, fertilizer, and watering. Qi did not doubt Xiaoxian's words. She had occasionally gone up the mountain to talk to Xiaoxian about the 1,000-grain gold sprouts. But every time she came, Xiaoxian would close the door so she did not disturb him. This time it was really urgent and she had to knock on the door. Looking at the sprouts, Qi's face was full of guilt. Elder, I have disappointed you. What's wrong? Are there problems with the sprouts? Xiaoxian asked. Qi's face was red and she felt even more guilty. She did not know what to say. It was not just problems. The sprouts that were growing well were starting to wilt. Qi brought Xiaoxian to a few fields. From the top of the mountain to the bottom of the mountain, the situation was similar. It was fine at the start and everyone was happy. But as they grew, they started to wilt. Qi told Xiaoxian about the sprouts' growth. Xiaoxian could not understand it either. Qi and the rest had taken good care of the sprouts. They should have been growing well when they first sprouted. How could they wilt? Could it be that they did not have enough nutrients? Qi and the rest had prepared the fertilizer and watched over the sprouts every day. When they heard Xiaoxian say that the area where they found the 1,000-grain gold was dry, they reduced the number of times they watered the sprouts. They only watered the sprouts according to the situation. Not acclimatized. They had sprouted leaves and were growing well at the start. But as they grew, they wilted and died one by one. Qi and the rest were heartbroken. The few elders did not sleep for a few days. They discussed and tried all sorts of methods but to no avail. Now, there were only about 20 sprouts left in the 10 plots of land. They were much taller than the ones in Xiaoxian's backyard. They were knee-high but they were wilting. They were even worse than the ones in Xiaoxian's backyard. Thinking about it, Xiaoxian couldn't come up with a reason. Then, Elder, what should we do next? Qi asked carefully. She was worried that Xiaoxian would scold them. When Xiaoxian gave them the seeds, they promised to do their best. But in the end, they failed to live up to Xiaoxian's expectations. Xiaoxian thought about the progress of deciphering the cloud patterns. He did not plan to stop halfway. It was rare for him to find an idea. He did not want to stop and think about other things. Compared to the 1,000-grain gold, he was more interested in the cloud patterns. The more he understood, the more he felt that the cloud patterns contained a huge secret about the Xia people. After thinking about it, Xiaoxian said, "How about this? Please help me take care of the sprouts in my backyard." Ah! Qi looked up in shock. Xiaoxian's decision was not only not to scold them, but also to entrust them with important tasks. How could she do that? But Qi was still curious about the sprouts in Xiaoxian's backyard. She wanted to know if the sprouts were still alive because they were not tall enough or because of other reasons. But what if the sprouts? Qi tugged at her muddy clothes nervously. She was in a dilemma. Don't worry. Even if all the sprouts die, I will not blame you. They are hard to grow anyway. Since they can't be grown, I will cook the remaining grains for everyone to eat, Xiaoxian said. Qi's face twitched. Such precious seeds were eaten? After Xiaoxian made his decision, he followed Qi's suggestion and opened a small door at the wooden fence in the backyard. According to Qi, they would definitely go over every day. They might even go over a few times a day. It was inevitable that they would disturb Xiaoxian. They just had to open a small door at the fence in the backyard for her to enter. They would take care of the other things themselves. Xiaoxian did not need to care. That afternoon, Xiaoxian made a movable door at the wooden fence. Since no one would dare to barge in, he did not even need to tie a rope. Closing the door, Xiaoxian's eyes swept across the courtyard. He felt that something was missing. When he was about to enter the house, he suddenly stopped at the door. Xiaoxian looked down at his feet. At the back door there was a weed. When Xiaoxian entered, his trousers swept across the weed, so he noticed it. He turned around and looked at the yard. He thought back to the time when the 1,000-grain gold sprouted. Xiaoxian remembered that there were many other unknown weeds growing in the yard. At that time, Xiaoxian was thinking about the cloud pattern. He planned to wait until the seedlings were bigger before getting rid of them. Who knew that he would wait until now? It had been more than 20 days. Xiaoxian did not even go out for a hunt. It had been more than 20 days, and in such warm weather, the annual weeds should have grown even more vigorously, right? But the truth was there were only a few weeds in the yard. Most of them were spread far away from the seedlings. The weeds from 20 days ago were long gone. Xiaoxian found a thick leaf without writing and recorded this discovery. He would look at it later. After entering the house, Xiaoxian continued to decipher the cloud patterns. He could already decipher the general meaning of the cloud patterns. Although he had only deciphered 2 cloud patterns and there was still a thick stack of cloud patterns to be deciphered, it was good to have some progress. Xiaoxian would decipher all the cloud patterns on the cauldron. In the following days, other than going out to hunt, Xiaoxian spent most of his time deciphering the cloud patterns in the house. As for the 1,000-grain gold seedlings in the backyard, he would only occasionally take a look at them when he was resting. When he came back from his hunt, Xiaoxian asked about the situation of the Qi seedlings. In the 10 plots of land on the mountain, only 2,000-grain gold seedlings were still alive. They were the 2 slowest growing seedlings. They didn't look like they could last much longer. The 80 seedlings in Xiaoxian's backyard were also growing faster under the care of Qi and the rest. The seedlings in Xiaoxian's backyard were almost as tall as the seedlings they took care of before. However, when they reached this height, it was as if they couldn't cross the threshold. They changed their growth pattern and started to wither until all of them died. That was why Qi and the rest were worried as they watched the seedlings grow taller by the day. For the sake of the seedlings in Xiaoxian's backyard, Qi even invited some people to the Taiha tribe to exchange their experiences. They wanted to lower their status and learn something useful from the Taiha people. If they could take care of the seedlings, they would be able to answer to Xiaoxian. However, the situation in the Taiha tribe wasn't good either. They only lasted a little longer than them. Once the seedlings reached that stage, they withered. When Qi and the rest went over, the Taiha people wanted to go over to Yanjiao to take a look. Fertilizing the land, plowing the soil, improving the soil. Everything was done. The seedlings were so healthy. Why did they wither in the blink of an eye? As expected of the precious 1,000-grain gold. They were so hard to take care of. Everyone was worried. Because of the Taiha people's meticulous care, the seedlings grew too quickly. Although they were planted later, they were still growing faster than the ones in Xiaoxian's yard. But once the seedlings reached that stage, they withered. There was no helping it. They heard that only the ones in Xiaoxian's backyard were left. Hence, the Taiha people went over to Yanjiao every day to take a look. Seeing that the seedlings were growing faster under the care of Yanjiao and Taiha people, and that they were about to reach that threshold, Qi and the rest were even more worried. They couldn't sleep at night. It was as if they had an anxiety disorder. Xiaoxian, on the other hand, had been deciphering the cloud patterns behind closed doors. He did not experience their fear at all. Chapter 403. Xiaoxian wrote down all the cloud patterns he could decipher on an animal skin scroll, and the ones he couldn't decipher on another scroll. Then he tidied up and slept for 2 days. After resting, Xiaoxian's dizziness from deciphering the cloud patterns was gone. He felt refreshed and heard voices in the backyard. Thinking about the seedlings, he went to the backyard. Taiha's Quan Bai and the other 5 had been living in the Yanjiao tribe. They followed Qi and the rest up the mountain to Xiaoxian's backyard to take care of the seedlings. If they had anything to discuss, they would not do it in the yard. If they spoke, they would lower their voices to avoid disturbing Xiaoxian. When Xiaoxian opened the back door and looked into the backyard, he found a dozen old men and women squatting in his backyard. There were also people standing outside the backyard, craning their necks to look inside. He then looked at the seedlings in the field. Judging by their height, they were already above his knees. They were green and in good condition. When they saw Xiaoxian, Qi, Quan Bai and the rest quickly stood up. "How is it?" Xiaoxian asked. Qi was confused and excited, replying, "There are 62 left. A while ago, the seedlings here had also died. When they saw the wilting seedlings, Chi-Chi, Quan-Bai and the rest felt helpless. They even wanted to give up. But soon, they found that not all seedlings were wilting. Most of them were still fine. Someone suggested to pull out the wilting seedlings. He felt that the wilting seedlings were infected. If they were left in the field, they would spread the disease to the other seedlings. When they were planting in Taiha, they were reluctant at first. Later, more and more seedlings were like this, so they pulled out the rest. Unfortunately, they were all wiped out in the end. However, after some consideration, Chi-Chi did not uproot the seedlings directly. They had tried uprooting the sickly seedlings in their 10 plots of land, but to no avail. It was the same whether they uprooted the seedlings or not. Therefore, he didn't bother about it and continued to stay in the field. Luckily, the other 60-plus stalks were still growing healthily. As the days passed, there were no signs of illness. Chi-Chi's worries were gradually put to rest. This made her overjoyed. Xiaoxian looked at the few dead seedlings in the field and didn't pay much attention to them. It was already beyond his expectations that more than 60 of them could survive. Xiaoxian had originally thought that if he couldn't plant it, he would just eat the remaining grains. But now it seemed that he should wait a little longer. The few people from Taiha were very concerned about Xiaoxian's attitude. They were afraid that Xiaoxian would chase them away, so they were very obedient. Even when Duokong made fun of them several times, they didn't argue. Seeing that Xiaoxian didn't chase them away, Quan-Bai was slightly relieved. At the same time, he was thinking about why the 1,000 gold seedlings in Xiaoxian's backyard could survive that hurdle. Could it be that the seeds given were different? When he thought about this, Quan-Bai denied it. The seeds planted by Chi-Chi and the others had all died. Xiaoxian wouldn't use inferior seeds to fool them. Why was that? Xiaoxian didn't know either, but he wasn't that stubborn. When he returned to the house, Xiaoxian thought of something and opened the storage room where he stored the food. The storage room was near the back door and beside it was the kitchen. Sometimes, Xiaoxian would just take food from the storage room and go next door to cook. Xiaoxian remembered that because he was busy with the cloud patterns, he didn't even use a pot, didn't cook soup, didn't roast meat, and only ate the dried meat. It was more convenient that way. When he was hungry, he would eat a piece of dried meat and drink some water before continuing to decipher the cloud patterns. Thinking back, Xiaoxian remembered that when he prepared the dried meat, other than the marinated meat, he also kept a fresh beast leg. He planned to roast it. Because he had just returned from a hunt, he brought back a lot of trophies. He didn't have a place to put the leg, so he just threw it on the ground. When he was about to roast the meat in the storage room, he suddenly had an idea. He dropped what he was doing and rushed to decipher the cloud patterns. He was so busy that he didn't go back to the storage room. Logically speaking, the beast leg that wasn't marinated and dried should have rotted in the storage room. However, Xiaoxian didn't smell a strong rotting smell. Xiaoxian opened the door of the storage room and looked inside. There was light coming in from the window, so the situation inside was clear at a glance. Xiaoxian's gaze stopped on the ground. There was a piece of beast skin there. The protruding part was similar to the shape of a bone, but the other parts had sunk in and were stuck to the ground. Other than that, there was something else on the beast's skin. Xiaoxian walked closer to take a look. He found that it was something like a plant's root system. It was very thin and slightly white, as if it could be broken with a casual pull. However, it was this thin and weak thing that went up from the ground, penetrated the beast's skin, and then from another place, penetrated the beast's skin again, and plunged into the ground. That was the beast's skin of a fearsome beast. Even a stone knife of slightly inferior quality wouldn't be able to cut it. But now this beast's skin seemed to be sewn to the ground. Xiaoxian pulled slightly, but it didn't budge. He had to use force. However, Xiaoxian didn't intend to tear it apart by force for the time being. He used his black knife to cut open the beast's skin. There was almost no flesh under the beast's skin, only bones. The beast leg that Xiaoxian had thrown here was about a meter long. But now there was only skin and bone left. Where did the white roots come from? Xiaoxian stood up and looked out the window. On the other side of the window was the backyard. There were only the 1,000 grain gold in the backyard now. Even the weeds were weak. Now, because Chi-Chi and the rest were taking care of the weeds, They pulled them out whenever they saw them. But what about before? Before Chi-Chi came, there weren't any weeds in the backyard. Xiaoxian gently kicked the white root that had pierced through the animal's skin. He went out and carefully looked around the house, but he didn't find any other white roots. Using his special vision, Xiaoxian saw below the ground. The white roots did indeed extend from the backyard where the 1,000-grain gold was planted. However, the roots were too deep and Xiaoxian couldn't see clearly. After thinking about it, Xiaoxian didn't tell Chi-Chi and the rest about this. He wasn't sure if that was the root of the 1,000-grain gold, so he didn't throw any more meat on the ground. Another 10 days passed. Something happened to the seedlings in the yard. Chi-Chi and Quanbai were worried. A few of them started to wilt. They were worried. Some even guessed that it was a second hurdle. Quanbai even went back to Taihe to bring some special fertilizers. There were animal fertilizers and plant fertilizers. These fertilizers helped to alleviate the wilting. The number of sickly plants didn't increase. However, the sickly plants started to die. Quanbai and the rest couldn't save them no matter how hard they tried. 62 stalks, 7 of them gone in one go. Chi-Chi, Quanbai, and the others were pounding their chests in pity. However, a few days later the situation changed again. More plants started to wilt. This time everyone panicked. What should they do? Xiaoxian asked for a piece of fresh meat. He didn't clean it up. He brought it to the storage room and placed it on top of the beast's skin that was sewn to the ground. The next day when Xiaoxian went to take a look, he saw another white root on top of the ground. The white root was stuck into the meat. The change was obvious. It shrunk every day until only a piece of beast's skin was left. There was a white root sticking out of it. It was similar to the previous situation. After that, the remaining 52,000-grain gold plants in the backyard didn't show any signs of illness other than the 3 plants that showed signs of withering. This made Chi-Chi and Quanbai heave a sigh of relief. However, they were still confused. Xiaoxian didn't explain to them. Xiaoxian stared at the 2 pieces of beast skin on the ground. After a while, he patted the white root with his knife. 1,000-grain gold? What a picky eater! As the days passed, the long and narrow needle-shaped leaves on the 1,000-grain gold plant gradually increased in number. They grew longer and swayed energetically in the wind. After discovering the white roots in the storage room, Xiaoxian would cut off some meat and place it on the floor of the storage room every time he came back from a hunt. After checking, he confirmed that the roots were from the 1,000-grain gold plants. It was even possible that all 50 plants were connected to one root. The mountain was huge and there was still some distance between each house. Other people would not leave fresh meat on the ground for too long. It was only because Xiaoxian was too busy that he forgot to clean it up. That was why such a situation happened. As soon as Xiaoxian stopped supplying the meat, there would be problems in the backyard, and the people who took care of that piece of land panicked again. After that, Xiaoxian told Chi-Chi about his discovery. He brought her to the storage room to see the leftovers and the white roots. Maybe there are other fertilizers that can support its growth. But for now, this is the only way. Xiaoxian pointed at the beast skin on the floor. Chi-Chi was shocked. While Xiaoxian was still thinking about how wasteful it was, she was already excited. It's good that you know the reason. As for the meat required for this method, it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't winter now. They could bring back a lot of food every time they hunted. She could eat less, but she couldn't save on the 1,000-grain gold. There were less than 40 plants left in the field. Chi-Chi didn't want to see any more plants wither and die. Meat? Here. 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 When Quanbai and the others found out, they were even more enthusiastic than the Yanjiao people. If the Yanjiao people couldn't afford it, the Taihe people would do it for them. Xiaoxian didn't agree to let Quanbai and the others bring meat. He could handle it himself. However, Xiaoxian also thought that he wouldn't plant it again after this time. This thing was too picky. Chapter 404. After the 1,000 gold grain seeds were fed with fearsome beast meat, they seemed to dislike the meat. 2 more plants died in the field. Seeing this, Chi-Chi and the rest threw a few pieces of fearsome beast meat on the ground. If Xiaoxian wasn't an elder, Chi-Chi and Quanbai would have teamed up to criticize him. They thought that Xiaoxian didn't care about the 1,000 gold grain seeds. In fact, Xiaoxian didn't care much about it. Plus, he had been busy deciphering the cloud patterns, so he didn't pay much attention to the seeds. Xiaoxian had eaten the 1,000 gold grain seeds before, and felt the benefits it brought. However, he didn't think the benefits were that amazing. There were at least 3 plants in the Taiha tribe that could compare to it. Plus, the way they planted it was much simpler and the harvest was better. If the 1,000 gold grain seeds they produced were like what Xiaoxian had eaten before, it wasn't worth it. The tribe didn't rely on farming for a living. Every time they went out to hunt, they could get medicinal plants and fruits. Why would they put in so much effort to plant these 1,000 gold grain seeds? Plus, hunting fearsome beasts was very dangerous. No one in the tribe would be willing to risk their lives just to get a few seedlings. As for Chi-Chi and Quanbai, they had never tried it before. Who knew if they would still be as passionate after experiencing such hardships and tasting the 1,000 grain gold? One day, Xiaoxian rubbed his tired eyes and walked out of the house. He walked into the yard and saw the 1,000 gold grain seeds that he hadn't seen for a few days. Suddenly he stopped stretching. He wasn't sure if it was because of the competition, but even with the supply of fearsome beast meat and fertilizers, 1 or 2 plants would die every once in a while. Now there were only 34 plants left. Each plant was almost as tall as Xiaoxian's shoulder. He didn't know when they would be able to plant. What surprised Xiaoxian were the leaves of the 1,000 gold grain seeds. They were wider and longer than Xiaoxian remembered. Each plant was thicker than the ones he saw at the top of the mountain surrounded by rats. He held a needle-like leaf between his fingers and felt it. It felt different. Was it because the conditions were better? Was that why they were stronger? If that was the case, would the grains they produced have stronger medicinal properties? Would they be more beneficial? Xiaoxian checked the other 30 plants. Every plant that was still alive had bigger leaves than the ones Xiaoxian saw. According to Chi-Chi, they were still growing and would grow taller. He didn't know what they would become by then. If the harvest was better than the effort, he could continue experimenting with the seeds he had left. If the losses outweighed the gains, Xiaoxian would keep some and feed the rest to the tribesmen. Who knew how long those grains would be effective? He didn't ask Jiju. Here, even the experienced Taiha people couldn't tell him. Xiaoxian flicked the needle-like leaves and said softly, "Let's see if you can give me a satisfactory result." It had been almost half a year since the beginning of winter last year. Their progress was significant. They had finally touched the door. They were slightly better than the ancestors of the Taiha tribe. After all, they had absorbed their results and thoughts. However, there was still a certain degree of difficulty in opening the door. Xiaoxian was stumped. It was as if he saw the door and desperately wanted to open it to see what was behind it. However, there was a lock on the door and Xiaoxian didn't know how to open it. "It's so hard." Xiaoxian sighed. He went out and walked around the tribe. After talking to Duokong and Guangyi, Xiaoxian understood that the shamaness and chief had sent a team to the coast where Xiaoxian came from. When Xiaoxian brought his people there, he left a group to guard the coast. Every once in a while, the shamaness and chief would send another group to exchange with them. Then they would continue to observe the coast. They only wondered if there would be a day when there would be a change on the coast that would make them happy. After walking around, Xiaoxian saw Chi-Chi and Quanbai taking care of the 1,000 grain gold plants in the yard. They came twice a day. Sometimes when the weather changed, they came more often. They even stayed on the mountain. Because of the 1,000 grain gold, the relationship between the Taiha people and the Yanjiao people had improved. The Taiha people even revealed some of their secret techniques. If the 1,000 grain gold plants could bear fruit that satisfied them, they would have to show their sincerity if they wanted more grains. When Xiaoxian stepped into the backyard, he heard Quanbai holding a scroll and talking to the Yanjiao people. "Back then, our tribe's ancestors found the dry water green here." Quanbai's voice was filled with pride and satisfaction. The dry water green was a type of medicinal herb. It grew in a special environment. It liked drought when it was young. It wouldn't germinate when it was wet. Instead, its seeds would rot. Once it grew to a certain stage in the arid land, due to the rainfall in the mountains, if a spring appeared in the growing area, the drought water green would continue its second stage of growth in the water surrounded by the spring until it bloomed and bore fruit. Because the seedlings, flowers and fruits were all green, the Taiha people named it the dry water green. It was a good medicine for internal and external injuries. The tribe often traded the dry water green from the Taiha people. The warriors would bring some with them when they went hunting. It was said that most of the herbs planted by the Taiha tribe were found by the ancestors of the Taiha tribe many years ago. Then, after many generations of searching, they found the most suitable way to plant them. As for where the Taiha people found the herbs, it was always kept a secret. It was an important source of income for the Taiha people. They wouldn't tell anyone. It was only because of the 1,000-grain gold incident that they talked about it a little. However, some of the important parts were vague and did not go into detail. Xiaoxian was curious. He leaned over to look at the scroll in Quan Bai's hand. It was a map. More accurately, it was a simplified map. Before showing it to the Yinjiao people, Quan Bai personally simplified the original map and blurred out some details. It was like drawing a tree without leaves, only the trunk and branches. But when Xiaoxian saw the lines on the scroll, his eyes twitched. This map looked familiar. After thinking for a while, Xiaoxian's pupils dilated. "What are those curved lines?" Xiaoxian asked. Quan Bai was so engrossed in his explanation that he didn't notice Xiaoxian behind him. He was shocked by Xiaoxian's sudden question. He dared to show off in front of others but not in front of Xiaoxian. After all, the 1,000-grain gold belonged to Xiaoxian. He had a favor to ask of him. Hearing Xiaoxian's words, Quan Bai adjusted his expression and put on a smile. "Those are rivers. The thick ones represent big rivers. The thin ones represent small rivers. Here, this is the river in your hunting area." Because in Yanjiao's hunting area, the rivers weren't drawn in detail. Quan Bai said that it was drawn 1,000 years ago before the Yinjiao people came here. As for this small river, they didn't draw it. Xiaoxian knew about the river that Quan Bai was talking about. When he was looking for the glowing stones, he heard about it from others. The river that they dug for the glowing stones should have been filled with water by now. It was just that it wasn't marked on Quan Bai's map. Xiaoxian's attention wasn't on the small river branches. What he cared about was the thickest river, and the few important branches that extended from it. The main river was curved and only part of it was drawn on the map. The two ends weren't completely drawn. It was said that one end was the sea and the other was the center of the continent. But just the lines of the river were already of great help to Xiaoxian. He had already solved one of the problems he faced while deciphering the cloud patterns. Quan Bai was worried that Xiaoxian would ask about some secret things and was thinking about how to reject him. But when he heard that Xiaoxian only asked about the rivers and some unimportant geographical information, he heaved a sigh of relief. He didn't ask about the place where their ancestors found the herbs. After getting the information he wanted, Xiaoxian patted Quan Bai's shoulder happily. "Thank you." Then Xiaoxian rushed back into the house. Quan Bai was confused by Xiaoxian's reaction. He looked at the others and asked Chi-Chi, "What's wrong with your young elder?" Who knows? Chi-Chi didn't know what Xiaoxian was thinking about, but she didn't ask. Even if she knew, she wouldn't tell the Taiha people. There were interactions between the two tribes, but if it wasn't approved by the shaman and chief, they wouldn't talk about it. The matter that the elder was thinking about should be quite important, so he couldn't tell anyone about it. On the other side, Xiaoxian rushed back into the house and closed the door. He moved a stack of leaves to the left of the table. These leaves had cloud patterns drawn on them, but he couldn't decipher them. He couldn't even guess. But when he saw the lines on the map in Quan Bai's hand, he realized that the cloud patterns he couldn't decipher weren't words, they were lines. Lines that represented geographical locations. When he reached a bottleneck in deciphering the cloud patterns, Xiaoxian stared at the cloud patterns on the cauldron. Even if he closed his eyes, he might not be able to draw the lines perfectly, but he wasn't far off. Xiaoxian had memorized the patterns. When he was immersed in his thoughts for too long, he would automatically think about the cloud patterns when he looked at the map in Quan Bai's hand. That was why he could think of the things he couldn't decipher when he looked at the map in Quan Bai's hand. He unfolded the stack of leaves and arranged them according to the pattern on the cauldron. Then Xiaoxian took out a tree branch and tried to draw on the sand table. He removed the exaggerated or hidden lines and left the important ones. The cloud patterns on the cauldron were actually a combination of words and drawings. Chapter 405. After 2 sleepless days of deciphering, Xiaoxian drew the final result on an animal skin scroll. Although he did not understand the cloud patterns on the cauldron, Xiaoxian already knew a lot from what he had pieced together. The cloud patterns around the cauldron were like a guide. Most of the Xia people's cauldrons, no, not just cauldrons but other objects, would have such cloud patterns. Just as Zheng Luo said, these cloud patterns were different from the decorative cloud patterns other craftsmen made when they were casting bronze. These patterns had inherent secrets and were almost publicly displayed to the world, but few people knew about them. These cloud patterns were complicated, but every successful Xia person had to master them. It was like an anti-counterfeiting symbol. Back then, the ancestors of the Taihe tribe could not replicate it even if they wanted to. Not only that, after deciphering the cloud patterns, Xiaoxian felt that they contained an even greater secret. Perhaps it was a secret about the Xia people or something more important. What were the Xia people good at? Forging. It was said that they were also good at making precision objects. The cauldrons they made were almost perfect circles. As for why there was a cauldron that failed to be forged, Xiaoxian did not know for now. However, from what he heard from others, the Xia people were indeed very capable. Did the secret about the Xia people also involve forging? In the information he deciphered from the cloud patterns, it mentioned a place. Xia descendants had to go there before they were considered true Xia people, and worthy of the surname Gongjia. Otherwise, they were failures of the Xia people. Xiaoxian did not know how many years ago the Xia ancestors set this cloud pattern, but this cloud pattern had existed for at least 1,000 years. It had existed even before the Yinjiao people arrived. Forging. This was indeed something that Xiaoxian was very interested. If he could master it, he would be able to master half of the Xia people's skills. His tribe's bronze wares would take a huge step forward. In this aspect, the Yinjiao people were indeed far behind. This tribe was still alright. The tribe on the other side of the sea probably still did not have their own metal weapons. However, there was a core seed there. If they went back one day, everyone would be able to use the skill. As for the flat cauldron in the house, the cloud patterns on the 3 legs represented 3 words. Gongjia Mountain. The pattern left behind by the Xia people was ultimately referring to Gongjia Mountain. From the name, could it be the Xia headquarters? Or was it their ancestral land before the Xia tribe split up? No matter what, Xiaoxian planned to follow the pattern and look around. If he could find the place and learn something from the Xia people, Xiaoxian's time would not have been wasted. Xiaoxian went to the shamaness and the chief to discuss this. The chief wanted to send someone to follow Xiaoxian, but there were only a handful of people who had the ability to follow Xiaoxian. Following Xiaoxian was not a burden. If they randomly sent someone, it would only affect Xiaoxian's movements. That was why only Guangyi and Duokong were qualified. In the end, Xiaoxian decided to go alone. He did not know how long he would be gone this time. The tribe still had a few trades with other tribes, so he needed Duokong and Guangyi to lead them. Xiaoxian himself had to stay in the tribe to hold the fort. Plus, the place he was going to was not familiar to the tribesmen, so the others could not lead the way. Since I can find this place alone, I can go anywhere else. Don't worry, Xiaoxian said to the shamaness and the chief. However, the shaman and the chief were still quite worried, and they took out some forged weapons and medicines. Xiaoxian did not reject their kindness. He took a sword from Zheng Luo and some medicine from the shamaness. The shamaness had taught Xiaoxian how to recognize these medicines, so he knew how to use them. It doesn't matter if we can't find Gongjia Mountain. Forging skills are not as important as staying alive. The shamaness reminded Xiaoxian to come back if he could not handle it. Zheng Luo had the same thought. Although the cloud patterns Xiaoxian mentioned might have something to do with the Xia ancestral land and forging skills, he was more concerned about Xiaoxian. After all, Xiaoxian was the only person from the other tribe who came here safely. He was also an elder acknowledged by the ancestors. If anything happened to him, would the ancestors still protect them? Zheng Luo still wanted to bring the tribe back to Yinjiao's ancestral land when he was still alive. I know. Xiaoxian nodded. You know nothing. The shamaness and chief cursed silently. They had no choice. If Xiaoxian was as mature as Guangyi, they would not have to worry. However, Xiaoxian was too young. They were worried about a young man's temperament. The 1,000 grain gold's illness had been solved. Chi-Chi and the rest could take care of it. Xiaoxian did not have to worry. Hence, on a sunny day, Xiaoxian set off to find the Xia's secret. The first place he went was the river where he dug the water sunstones. After winter, when the snow melted, other than melting snow, there was also more rain. The river had risen. There were more crocodiles in the river. Every time the hunting party went hunting, they would go around this area. These crocodiles were very aggressive. They did not care who was on the river bank. All humans, wild animals, fearsome beasts were their prey. In terms of size, the crocodiles here were bigger than the ones Xiaoxian saw in the drumming tribe. There were also differences in their shapes. These crocodiles had longer snouts than the ones in the drumming tribe. Their upper jaw was longer than the lower jaw, and they had more teeth. The drumming tribe's crocodiles had around 60 to 70 teeth. The crocodiles here definitely had more than 100 teeth. Their thick, nail-like teeth and their distribution in the crocodiles' mouths showed that these crocodiles were very good at catching prey. Their huge, sharp teeth could easily clamp down on their prey and drag them into the water to tear them apart. Their powerful biting ability and well-developed muscles allowed these seemingly clumsy fellows to move with exceptional agility. The crocodiles of the drumming tribe, because they lived with humans, were more or less tainted with human emotions. Even if it was only towards the people of the drumming tribe, it was still there. However, the crocodiles here wanted to kill everything. This was Xiaoxian's first impression of them. The sun was just right. Many of the crocodiles were lying on the shore, basking in the sun. Some of them were rolling around in the mud, some were biting each other, or perhaps they were fighting. From time to time there would be some hissing sounds. When he was in the drumming tribe, Xiaoxian knew that these creatures that only knew how to bite and kill were actually very smart and cunning. They didn't have big brains, but their intelligence was far beyond people's imagination. When Xiaoxian lived in the drumming tribe, he once saw a child from the drumming tribe teasing a crocodile in the pond next to his house. Xiaoxian remembered that the child stood on the ground next to the pond. He didn't immediately throw the meat over. Instead, he first patted the crocodile's nose. This was like an agreement between them. After patting, the crocodile would open its mouth and wait for the child to throw the meat into its mouth before closing its mouth again. The second time, the child took out another piece of meat from the basket. However, the crocodile in the pond retreated a little. The child wanted to pat its nose, but he couldn't. So he walked a few steps towards the pond and finished the game of patting the crocodile's nose. The third time, the crocodile retreated a little further into the pond. The child continued to move forward. Both of his feet were already in the water. When the child threw the meat into the crocodile's mouth, the crocodile swallowed the food. Then it quickly bit the child's clothes and dragged him into the water. The child, who was standing there with the basket, was instantly dragged into the water. Xiaoxian, who was standing not far away, broke out in a cold sweat when he saw this scene. However, the people next to him told him that it was the tribe's Baoyu playing with the children. They were just teasing the children. Sure enough, when Xiaoxian looked over again, the rolling crocodile only bit the child's clothes. Didn't really bite him. The child was laughing and playing with the crocodile in the water. The meat in the basket had all fallen into the water and was divided by the crocodile in the pond. It was just a game. However, the game of the beasts was closely related to hunting. At that time, Xiaoxian knew that the crocodiles knew how to strategy and how to lure their targets. On land, the crocodiles might be slightly inferior, but in the water, even the drumming tribe's people who were good at swimming were no match for the crocodiles. If the child was standing on the ground, his reaction might have been faster. However, he was lured into the pond by the crocodile and his movements were limited. He didn't even have time to move before he was dragged in. The people of the drumming tribe were used to it. In their eyes it was just a game. However, in the eyes of others, the crocodiles were extremely dangerous demons. If the child was a member of another tribe, he wouldn't have been bitten by the crocodile. Instead, he would have been bitten by the crocodile's arm, leg or other body parts. After being dragged into the water, the possibility of him coming back to shore was very small. The crocodile's swaying dance and death roll were not a joke. The people outside the drumming tribe saw the crocodiles as killing machines. Xiaoxian wouldn't provoke these killing machines, so he stayed far away. He didn't even get close to the river bank. He just followed the river to find the right direction. Based on the patterns he deciphered, Xiaoxian followed the river until he found the bigger one. Then, he continued to follow the bigger one. The bigger river that didn't dry all year round was just an inconspicuous and easily overlooked tributary on the map. From Quanbai and the rest, Xiaoxian knew that there were crocodiles in these rivers and they had been around for a long time. Before the Taiha ancestors looked for herbs, crocodiles lived in the rivers deep within the forest, especially the thickest main river on the map. Quanbai said that their ancestors had records of crocodiles. They said that there were extremely large, strange fish and fearsome beasts there. They were not to be trifled with, so they had to run for their lives. Xiaoxian didn't know how big the crocodiles in the records were, but they were definitely bigger than the crocodiles in these tributaries. Most creatures would stop growing after they reached a certain stage of development, such as humans. However, some creatures didn't. They were in the category of unlimited growth, such as trees and the crocodiles that lived in the rivers deep in the forest. Chapter 406. It took Xiaoxian over 20 days to go from the small tributary in the hunting area to the wider river, and then to the main river on the map. Xiaoxian had been hurrying along for the past 20 days without resting. He didn't expect it to take so long just to find the main river. No wonder the people of the Taiha tribe said that when their ancestors went out to search for medicinal plants, they would be gone for a year. If they were looking for seasonal plants that bloomed and bore fruit, the herb gatherers would wait even longer because they might miss the opportunity and have to wait for the next year. Xiaoxian didn't need to wait. He just needed to find the place. Xiaoxian climbed up a tree and stood on a branch. He took out his animal skin scroll and looked at the map he'd drawn, trying to guess his current location. There was no GPS, so he could only guess based on the places he'd passed and the general environment. The trees around him weren't tall and the ground was wet. There were many potholes and ponds and many aquatic plants. This was a swamp area. To find the main river as quickly as possible, Xiaoxian had passed through the dangerous swamp area instead of the safer mountainous area. Although the forest was dangerous too, it was still better than the swamp area. Now the trees weren't too dense. The bottom of the trees shimmered. Xiaoxian had to pay attention to his surroundings as he looked at the map. This should be the place. It's not bad. Xiaoxian looked at a large river not far away, calculating how long it would take to find Gongjia Mountain. He only knew some vague geographical information. He couldn't find the details. Things didn't go well, it would take even longer. As he was thinking, Xiaoxian's eyelids twitched. He didn't even bother to keep the animal skin scroll in his hands. Instead, he leapt up with all his might. Just as Xiaoxian moved, the calm water under the tree split open. A huge, long, narrow mouth full of sharp teeth opened up, biting at where Xiaoxian had been standing. It was a huge crocodile more than 10 meters long. As for how long it was, Xiaoxian had no time to speculate. Because of the sudden jump, some of the water plants and leaves floating on the water surface were also lifted high into the air. The slightly muddy water droplets scattered to the surroundings along with the waves. Xiaoxian could even smell the muddy water and the smell of aquatic plants, as well as a murderous stench. That pair of cold, emotionless eyes met Xiaoxian's in the air. It opened its mouth to bite, but Xiaoxian retreated first. It only bit the branch that Xiaoxian was standing on. Crack! The crisp snapping sound indicated that the branch, which was as thick as a person, was as easy as biting a biscuit for the crocodile. The place where Xiaoxian had been standing was at least 7 meters above the ground, but the crocodile had easily crossed this height, and even its entire head was higher. The big mouth continued to move upward, and Xiaoxian could see that the crocodile's nasal cavity was slightly larger than that of an ordinary crocodile. The crocodile didn't give up after missing its attack. Instead, it swung its head vigorously in the air, opened its mouth again, and swept towards Xiaoxian for a second bite. Based on the crocodile's hook-like teeth structure at the front of its snout, they were better at catching prey. As long as Xiaoxian was bitten anywhere on his body, even if it was just his trousers or the corner of his clothes, he would be tightly hooked and dragged down. However, Xiaoxian's reaction was too fast. Even though the crocodile had already made a second attempt, Xiaoxian still escaped from its biting range. He was only half a person's length away. However, the crocodile had already begun to descend, and it couldn't make a third bite. Its closed mouth made a banging sound, and its scaly jaws trembled from the action of biting, as if venting its master's unwillingness. In the end, the crocodile fell heavily into the water, splashing up a large amount of turbid water mixed with seaweed. After falling back into the water, the crocodile didn't get up again, but left with the ripples of the water. Xiaoxian landed on another tree, but he didn't stop. Instead, he continued to jump a few times. A 7 to 8 meter branch wasn't safe at all. He had to find a bigger tree to rest on. That would be safer. The water under the tree was deeper than he thought, or the crocodiles wouldn't be able to hide their bodies completely. While Xiaoxian was looking for a taller tree, he encountered another leaping crocodile. As Xiaoxian bounced away, he drew the bronze sword that Zheng Luo had given him in the air. He twisted his waist and swung his arm with the sword, slashing the crocodile's mouth with great force. Clang! The vibrations from the sword showed the toughness of the crocodile's scales. However, Xiaoxian still managed to injure it, and the sword even pried off one of its teeth. If Xiaoxian had been stronger, he might have been able to cut a hole in the crocodile's jaw. Moving through the swamp was like moving through the crocodile's teeth. It was very dangerous, and because of this, the Taiha ancestors marked this swamp as an important place. If the Taiha descendants wanted to pass through this area, they had to be extra careful. The swamp was very wide. After Xiaoxian found a taller tree, he tried to find land. The river banks weren't all swamps. However, Xiaoxian didn't know where there was land. Even the Taiha ancestors left behind didn't mention it on the map. Xiaoxian could only rely on himself to find it. After putting away the map, Xiaoxian continued to jump above the swamp. He couldn't leave in the direction away from the river. Leaving the riverbank would indeed allow him to leave the swamp faster. But if he did that, Xiaoxian wouldn't know if he could determine the location of the main branch. After all, the main branch had curved a few times and didn't flow in a straight line. After walking for half a day in the swamp beside the river, the swamp gradually narrowed. Xiaoxian saw a large forest in front of him. It was taller and more lush, and he could even see the mountains. The swamp was coming to an end. Xiaoxian thought to himself. The number of crocodiles in the area had decreased by a lot. Previously, he had seen many crocodiles on the banks of the river and in the swamp. However, the closer he got, the harder it was for Xiaoxian to see a single one. Just like the fierce beasts in the mountains, a large crocodile needed to occupy a large area in order to obtain food for it to survive. There were only a few crocodiles in such a large area. This place wasn't out of the danger zone that the Taiha ancestors had marked out. It should still be the crocodile's territory. There had to be a reason for this abnormality. Xiaoxian became even more vigilant. As he ran towards the forest, Xiaoxian caught a glimpse of something floating on the surface of the river. After jumping up a tall tree, Xiaoxian looked at the river. There was a clump of water grass on the surface of the river. However, upon closer inspection, Xiaoxian felt that something was amiss. The clump of water grass floated up and down on the surface of the river. Bang! The clump of water grass shook and floated up a little. Water splashed out from it. At the same time, Xiaoxian also felt that the sound of the collision was very strange. There was more than one sound just now. It seemed to be the sound of metal colliding. What was that? Xiaoxian stared at the clump of water grass. There seemed to be something inside. A crocodile? A crocodile trapped in the water grass? No, upon closer inspection, the clump of water grass was square, and on both sides of the water grass was wood. Due to the violent tremors, the water grass had loosened a little. The exposed areas on both sides were tree trunks. That wasn't water grass. It was a cage. It was a trap. Xiaoxian was shocked. If it was a trap, it meant that there were human activities in the area. Moreover, they had specially made a trap. Judging from the size, it was probably to catch prey in the water. Some fishermen caught fish by casting nets, some were good at fishing, and some used water traps to catch prey. However, the third type was extremely rare. This was Xiaoxian's first time seeing a crocodile trap. Bang bang! The trapped crocodile struggled again, causing the water grass to loosen even more. This allowed Xiaoxian to see the trap more clearly. It was a metal cage. People from Yinjiao, Taiha and other tribes would not use metal to make traps. Although bronze was becoming more common, they were very frugal with their use of bronze. Even if they wanted to make a trap, they would not use so much to make one. How big were the crocodiles in the river? A cage like this was at least 15 meters long. How much metal did it use? The further away they were from the Great Six Cities, the less bronze ware they used. Xiao Xian had seen people from other tribes on his way here. The tribe he saw recently used horns and bones when they hunted. They rarely used bronzeware. Xiao Xian was very surprised to see such a huge metal cage. At the same time, Xiao Xian wondered if they were close to Gongjia Mountain. Other people did not use bronze, but the craftsmen were different. Plus, someone who could make a crocodile trap like this was definitely not an ordinary tribesman. Xiao Xian wasn't in a hurry to leave. He found a suitable tree and stood on top of it to hide, waiting. Since the trap had caught its prey, the person who said it would be here soon. If the crocodile in the cage continued to struggle, the trap would be damaged even more. Sure enough, not long after, Xiao Xian heard the sound of someone approaching quickly. The sound was not loud, and the person was very good at moving through the forest. Judging from the sound, the person should be very familiar with this area. When he moved, he was very decisive and did not hesitate to stop. He was very confident. The whooshing sound soon reached the riverbank not far away. Xiao Xian looked over and was stunned. He did not see the front, but at first glance, he thought it was a small crocodile moving around. But when he looked again, he realized it was actually a human figure. There were even human hands exposed. It really did look like a crocodile. Even when the drumming tribesmen were in totemic form, they did not look like this person. However, as he continued to observe, Xiao Xian realized it was actually a person wearing crocodile skin. When the drumming tribesmen used their totemic power to transform, their facial features and bones would change. This person only wore crocodile skin. His real appearance was not much different from a normal person. Chapter 407. After the man quickly came to the shore, he flipped through the grass, and then there was a crunching sound. Xiao Xian watched as the man pulled a thick vine. With the crunching sound, the vine was pulled out little by little, and the trap floating on the water quickly moved closer to the shore. The closer the trap was to the shore, the more the trapped crocodile struggled. However, compared to the crocodile Xiao Xian had encountered before, this one was much weaker. If it was in its peak condition, the trap might not have been able to last so long with such a large crocodile. After the trap was pulled ashore, its full appearance was revealed. It was a square metal cage. In order to keep it afloat on the water, thick tree trunks were tied to both sides of the cage to keep it afloat. The cage and the tree trunks were covered with water plants, probably to cover up the trap. It was unknown whether this cover was for people or crocodiles. Some people thought that fish were stupid and would fall for obvious traps, so there was no need to cover up the traps. However, the crocodiles here were not stupid. Even if there were stupid ones in front of them, they might be able to avoid the obvious traps. Xiao Xian watched as the man pulled the cage ashore. He tore off the water plants tied to the cage, then took out a vine from the grass nearby and tied it to a metal rod. The end of the vine was tied into a circular noose. Then the man opened the cage near the crocodile's head. The top of the cage was divided into 3 sections, and he had only opened 1/3 of the section near the head. After opening it, he put the metal rod tied to the noose inside, and the noose at the front of the rod was stretched toward the crocodile's mouth. The crocodile in the cage opened its mouth wide, revealing more than 100 teeth in its mouth. It was showing off its power to the man, and it couldn't wait to rush up and bite the man standing above it to death. The size of the noose was very suitable. With the strength and toughness of the vine, the noose could be maintained in a circle with a slight shake. The man neatly put the noose into the crocodile's mouth. If it was an inexperienced person, the noose might have gotten stuck between the crocodile's teeth, but the man succeeded on his first try. The noose directly wrapped around the crocodile's upper jaw. He opened the other 2 doors at the top of the cage. At the same time, the person moved the 4 corners of the cage. Then the cage turned from a square to a flat open shape. The crocodile closed its mouth. Because of its nature, the first thing it thought of after its upper jaw was trapped was to bite. After closing its mouth, it couldn't bite through the vines. Its teeth weren't like herbivores that could grind the vines in its mouth. On the contrary, because the vines were wrapped around the gap between its teeth, It couldn't bite through them in one go. Now it didn't have much strength to struggle free, so it used the crocodile's best skill, death roll. However, the tumbling of death in this situation only made it sink deeper into its predicament. Originally, the vines only wrapped around its upper jaw. Now that it was rolling, its mouth was bound. Without the restriction of the cage, the more it rolled to the side, the tighter its mouth was bound. After tying the crocodile's mouth, the man used other vines to add a few more loops around its mouth to be on the safe side. After that, the man found some large leaves and combined them with the vines to cover the crocodile's eyes. With its eyes covered, the crocodile's struggling movements decreased. Many fish could reduce their nervousness by tying their eyes. Obviously, crocodiles were similar to fish in this regard. The man knew the habits of crocodiles very well. The crocodile, whose mouth was tied and eyes covered, had its hind legs wrapped by the man's vines. Crocodiles were reptiles. When moving on the ground, their main strength came from their hind legs. The crocodiles that Xiaoxian encountered earlier were able to jump so high to bite Xiaoxian, who was standing on a tree. Other than their strong muscles, the crocodiles also had powerful thighs. Therefore, the man tied the crocodile's legs to restrict its movements. After tying its mouth, blindfolding its eyes, and binding its hind legs, the crocodile was lying there motionless. The man stood to the side and watched. Then he pulled the vines and added a few more loops around the crocodile's mouth, covering almost all of its exposed teeth. Xiaoxian had experience. The crocodile's fangs were like knives when they shook their heads. They could easily hurt people. The man was sweating all over. He lifted the crocodile's hat back, revealing a dark face full of stubble. He put away the flat metal cage and hid it to the side. Then he pulled the rope that tied the crocodile. The man suddenly turned and looked in Xiaoxian's direction. "You've been watching for so long. It's time to come out, right?" the man said. There was no anger in his voice. His tone was very calm, as if he didn't care at all. Xiaoxian didn't think that he would be discovered, so he didn't bother hiding anymore. He jumped down from the tree and walked over. He also put his sword in a conspicuous place. If he hid his weapon, it would make the other party feel threatened and hostile. The other party's attitude was kind, and he didn't have any bad intentions. Xiaoxian didn't want to offend him. The man's gaze swept across Xiaoxian, then paused when he saw Xiaoxian's sword. His eyes flashed with undisguised disdain. "Which tribe are you from?" asked the man. "The Yinjiao tribe." After guessing his identity, Xiaoxian didn't hide it. After all, he had more questions to ask. Besides, this man didn't look like someone who was easily fooled. "The Yinjiao tribe?" The man thought for a moment. "I think I've heard of it." "Is it nearby?" "Yeah, it's quite far." "If it's so far away, why did you come to such a dangerous place? Are you here for training?" asked the man. "No." "Looking for herbs?" "No." "You're not here for Gongjia Mountain too, are you?" asked the man. Xiaoxian looked at him in surprise. He knew. "Really? You? And you're here for Gongjia Mountain?" The man looked at Xiaoxian as if to say, "You've overestimated yourself." He was looking for death. Are there a lot of people here for Gongjia Mountain?" Xiaoxian was curious. "Not many, but there are still a few people." However, as they searched, they ended up courting death. That person said in a flat tone. There was no sarcasm, no gloating. "Then you are, I'm Gongjia Hung." He didn't have to say much. One name was enough to reveal the most important information. When he announced his name, Hung was full of pride. The Xia people never hid their surname. They were proud of their surname, Gongjia, and their tribe. He really was a Xia. When Xiaoxian heard this, he was about to ask when the man continued, "Even I, a Xia, couldn't find Gongjia Mountain. How did you foreigners find it?" "You're looking for death." No wonder Gongjia Hung was so calm towards the people who came to look for Gongjia Mountain. He didn't look down on them. Even a proper Xia person like him couldn't find Gongjia Mountain. "Are there a lot of people looking for Gongjia Mountain?" asked Xiaoxian. "Not a lot, but it's not a small number either. I've been here for 20 years and I've met 17 people looking for Gongjia Mountain. 10 of them were Xia people like me and 7 of them were outsiders. In the end, 9 of them died. 5 returned with injuries while the other 3 continued searching. I don't know where they died. Maybe they found Gongjia Mountain, said Xiaoxian. Impossible. If I can't find it, how can they? Said Gongjia Hung confidently. If other people came, it meant that Xiaoxian wasn't the only one who solved the cloud pattern. However, not many people succeeded, so not many people came. However, finding Gongjia Mountain was more difficult than Xiaoxian expected. If even the Xia people couldn't find it, then the chances of others were even slimmer. After all, the Xia people knew more about the cloud pattern and had more information. Because no one could find it, Gongjia Hung didn't care if Xiaoxian came. He waved at Xiaoxian. Come help me. I'll share some meat with you later. In the past, when Gongjia Hung caught a crocodile, he wouldn't kill it here. He still had stock, so he didn't plan to kill it yet. He would keep it for a few days and wait for his stock to run out before killing a new one. That was why he would drag the crocodile back to where he lived after catching it. The Xia people were good at casting and forging. Those who could cast were strong too. It was not good to have weak arms when forging. That was why, compared to most people, the Xia people were stronger. In the past, Gongjia Hung would drag the crocodile back himself after catching it. In the past, he could use some tools like wheels. Now that he had used up a lot of materials, he had to drag it himself. It was too difficult to pull it himself, so he called Xiaoxian over to help. Here, you pull the tail, I'll pull the rope. Before he could finish, Xiaoxian picked up the tail and dragged the 10-meter-long crocodile forward. He walked so easily that he cut off Gongjia Hung's sentence. Your strength is not bad. Gongjia Hung pulled the rope for a while but realized he didn't have a chance to use his strength, so he let go. He stared at the crocodile to see if it was still tired and to prevent it from breaking its vines to attack people. Gongjia Hung had a large hammer in his hand. If anything happened, he would smash it. Is this crocodile drugged? Asked Xiaoxian. Crocodile? You mean it? Of course it's drugged, or it wouldn't be so quiet, said Gongjia Hung. The bait he placed in the cage contained a drug that made the crocodile weak. The drug was very strong and could last for half a day. If the crocodile didn't eat it, he would continue to feed it the drug. Right, asked Xiaoxian. How did you know I was hiding there? He thought he was good at hiding and didn't make a sound. I felt someone watching, said Gongjia Hung. Xiaoxian thought back. It made sense. He was too focused on the crocodile. Gongjia Hung had lived here for 20 years, so he was very sensitive. Of course he noticed. Chapter 408. Gongjia Hung lived in a mountain not too far from the river bank. They could see the mountain from the river bank since there weren't many mountains around. Xiaoxian asked a few probing questions along the way and Gongjia Hung answered them all. Unless it was about the Xia people's secrets, Gongjia Hung did not care about anything else. He talked about the weapons he had forged the most, including large cauldrons and ceremonial weapons like swords and spears. His words were filled with confidence and pride. In the eyes of the Xia people, if they claimed to be second in forging, no one would dare claim to be first. The only ones who could surpass them were from their own tribe. Even when Gongjia Hung was praising himself, he did not let his guard down. Although his expression and words were casual, he was able to react at the slightest movement. A strange worm with many legs suddenly leapt out of the bushes. Even though it was lying on the ground, it was still taller than Xiaoxian and Gongjia Hung. 2 antennae-like antennae waved on the top of its head. Its 2 large, pants-like fangs lunged at Xiaoxian and Gongjia Hung. Even the half-decayed giant tree trunk could not slow down the worm at all. Xiaoxian did not move. Gongjia Hung, who had just been showing off to Xiaoxian with a smile on his face, leapt high into the air, the hammer in his hand swinging like the wind. A powerful force was transmitted from his arm to the hammer, creating a terrifying aura as it slammed into the worm's head. A half-meter deep crater appeared on the giant insect's head as it clenched its fangs. The shell covering its head cracked open, and brownish-green liquid splashed out from the crack. Such a tyrannical blow did not kill the giant worm. But before the giant worm could react, the hammer flashed past like a hurricane, bringing with it a feeling of thunder. Bang! Bang! The broken outer shell exploded like fireworks under the barrage of hammer strikes, along with the worm's greenish-brown brain fluid. In the blink of an eye, the many-legged worm that had been charging at them was now lying there motionless. Its head had turned into a pile of mush. After the hammer left the worm's body, it continued to dance in Gong Jiaheng's hand. The 1,000-kilogram hammer was as light as a feather. It felt casual. Some people looked intimidating and strong but were actually weak inside. Gong Jiaheng, on the other hand, had a xia totem with bulging muscles that were filled with strength. He was a blacksmith after all. Gong Jiaheng flung the worm's brain fluid and shell off the hammer, then led Xiaoxian back to his house. Where were we? Oh right, a slave master named Chao asked me to forge a sword. With a smile on his face, Gong Jiaheng continued his story, as if smashing the worm into mush was just a trivial matter. Xiaoxian easily dragged the 10-meter-long crocodile to Gong Jiaheng's house. There was a cave at the foot of the mountain where some goods were stored. There was food and all sorts of tools, including stone tools, bone tools, and metal tools. However, Gong Jiaheng did not live inside. He built a stone house outside the cave. The room inside was not big. 2/3 of the space was used for blacksmithing. On their way here, Xiaoxian realized that there were many traps set around Gong Jiaheng's house. They were used to guard against wild beasts in the forest. If they could not guard against them, they could be used as an early warning. I live here, said Gong Jiaheng, pointing at the cave and stone house. Xiaoxian put down the crocodile and followed Gong Jiaheng to look around. Perhaps it was because very few people came here, so Gong Jiaheng was very friendly. He looked at the food in the cave. It was okay for him to eat normally, but it was not enough to entertain guests. Gong Jiaheng was a man who cared about his reputation. He had bragged so much just now, but now he felt that the conditions here were too shabby. He could only entertain guests with food. That was why he decided to cook the crocodile he hunted today. While Gong Jiaheng was killing the crocodile, Xiaoxian looked at the cave where Gong Jiaheng kept his things. Gong Jiaheng did not hide the things in the cave, allowing Xiaoxian to see. However, the stone house was not open to the public. That was where he blacksmithing. There were some things he could not show to outsiders. Xiaoxian did not mind. The cave was dark and deeper than he had imagined. Xiaoxian lit a torch and walked in. Their eyes swept across the cave. There were all sorts of tools, plants, and fruits. From the looks of it, Gong Jiaheng had indeed lived here for a long time. It was about the same as the 20 years he had claimed. After looking around, Xiaoxian walked out of the cave. When I was only 20 years old, I deciphered the meaning of the Xia pattern. I came out to look for Gongjia Mountain, said Gong Jiaheng as he dealt with the crocodile. The Xia pattern he was referring to was the complicated cloud pattern Xiaoxian had seen on the cauldron. Unfortunately, I searched for 20 years and still couldn't find the place. That's why I just stayed here. Every year I would go out to look for it. If I couldn't find it, I would come back here temporarily to rest and look again. Gong Jiaheng told Xiaoxian about his many years of hardship. At the same time, he wanted to give a piece of advice to the young man, Xiaoxian. Do not do things beyond your capabilities, or you will regret it. He had searched for 20 years and still couldn't find it. No wonder Gong Jiaheng did not mock the other people who went to look for Gongjia Mountain. He was the same. Fortunately, he was still alive and had not given up. At first I couldn't get used to it. Many of my tools were made of gold and my food was much more delicate. But after I came here I could only try my best to get used to it. All these years, Gong Jiaheng had learned many jungle survival skills from the tribes living in the forest. He did not have special ropes or copper chains, so he used vines instead. He knew which vines were suitable for hunting and how to make straw ropes. After so many years of searching for Gongjia Mountain, he had used up a lot of the gold he brought back. When he lacked materials, he would help the tribes in the forest forge weapons for low pay in exchange for materials. Sometimes he would ask them to bring some when they went on a trade trip. He was different from the tribesmen who grew up in the forest. For the first 20 years of his life, Gong Jiaheng lived in a city ruled by slave masters. As a Xia, he had excellent blacksmithing talent and lived a good life. Many people tried to flatter him. Even the slave masters would give him special treatment when they wanted weapons. However, after coming here he could not continue like that. Gong Jiaheng's strategy was to be friendly to the tribes in the forest. He needed people to work with him and ask for help. With his identity as a Xia and excellent blacksmithing skills, other than a few tribes who were extremely xenophobic and isolated from the rest of the world, Gongjia Hung met other tribes who treated him with respect. This was why he was so friendly when he met Xiaoxian. As long as they did not have ill intentions, Gongjia Hung would treat them with friendliness. Is that cage specially made to catch crocodiles? Asked Xiaoxian. Yes, there are many fish here. Gongjia Hung nodded solemnly. In such a primitive environment, in order to save materials, he could only learn to use materials other than metal. However, as a Xia person, he still leaned towards making metal. He had made other items in the past, but due to certain reasons, he abandoned the other metal items and made that cage. Many people laughed at him for being silly and wasteful, but he did not regret it. There's a giant fish in that river. Oh, it's the crocodile you mentioned. It's huge though. I was almost eaten by it a few times when I crossed the river. I don't even know how many weapons I lost in that river. Gongjia Hung grew angry at the mention of this. He looked in the direction of the river with hatred in his eyes. Looks like they had a grudge. Speaking of crocodiles, Gongjia Hung had lived here for 20 years. Even if he had never seen a crocodile in the first 20 years, he had lived in the forest for many years. The river is deep. When they're in the water, they only show their eyes and nostrils. Gongjia Hung told Xiaoxian this so that Xiaoxian could understand the crocodiles better. Their strong tails can propel them to swim quickly underwater. At the same time, they can reduce the waves and sneak up on their prey. Even if they lose a leg in a fight, it's fine because they're born to be strong. Many of them are missing a leg. That's a sign of their fighting style. That's why, Xiaoxian, if you encounter a crocodile that's missing a leg, do not underestimate it or you'll regret it. Gongjia Hung said, however, when you came here, the crocodile that's missing a leg is inconvenient. In shallow water and on land, they use their legs more. Sometimes in shallow water, they can even jump by stepping on rocks underwater. Yes, I've experienced this before. Xiaoxian had compared the crocodiles here to the crocodiles in the drumming tribe. The crocodiles here had stronger hind legs. And their teeth. If the drumming tribe's crocodiles' teeth were blunt cones, these crocodiles' teeth were sharp steel nails. Many aspects showed that the crocodiles here were more dangerous. Wow, I didn't expect this fish to be over 100 years old. Can be used as armor. Gongjia Hung picked up a scale and passed it to Xiaoxian. When the time comes, you can use its bone plates as armor. These fish can make good armor after they're over 100 years old. How do you know it's over 100 years old? Asked Xiaoxian. Look at the top. Gongjia Hung pointed at the scale. Look at the patterns. The scale Gongjia Hung passed to Xiaoxian had some patterns on it. They were like tree rings showing the crocodile's age. As for the bone plates, this was another difference between the crocodiles here and the ones in the drumming tribe. The crocodiles here had over 100 bone plates under their skin. It was a type of hard armor that covered the crocodile's back. Xiaoxian could cut the crocodile's mouth with his sword, but he might not be able to cut the crocodile's back. Young crocodiles might be able to cut it, but over 100 years old it would be difficult. Chapter 409. The Xia people had high standards in many aspects. If they praised something, it must be good stuff. Xiaoxian also believed that the bone plates on the backs of crocodiles that were over 100 years old would make excellent armor. Your armor is also made from the bone plates of a crocodile that's over 100 years old? Asked Xiaoxian. Heng's crocodile armor was assembled. Although it looked like a crocodile, if you looked at it separately, you could see the differences. For example, the protective bone plates on his chest and back were slightly different from the ones on the crocodile he was killing. You could see the patterns on them. Oh, that. Hung was proud. This fish is over 200 years old. Of course it's different. The bone plates of a crocodile that was over 200 years old were much sturdier than a 100-year-old crocodile. This 100-year-old crocodile was so big, yet Hung had called it the shortest of its age. A normal 200-year-old crocodile would definitely be much bigger than this one. Hung was proud of himself for being able to hunt such a huge creature. How old is the big crocodile in the river? Xiaoxian was referring to the giant crocodile that Hung had a grudge against. That one? I don't know. Maybe it's over 1,000 years old, maybe even older. No one can be sure. Hung sighed. The enemy was too strong, he could not fight it. Seeing that Hung didn't want to talk about it, Xiaoxian changed the topic and asked about making armor. Don't hunt another one. Use this one. Although it doesn't look big, it's fine as long as it's over 100 years old. You saw the one in the shallow water. Even if it was bigger than this one, it might not be 100 years old. It's not easy to catch one over 100 years old, said Hung. All right, I'll give you something in exchange. Xiaoxian reached into his bag. Sigh. It's just some bone plates. I have a lot of them in my collection. You don't have to give me anything in exchange. I'll give them to you. He saw that Xiaoxian was young and his tribe was far away. He didn't look like he had anything good, but he wasn't a threat. Hung had a good impression of him, so he decided to help him. He didn't need these things anyway, so he rejected him. Because it's a long journey, I didn't bring anything. Here, take this. It might be useful, Xiaoxian said, pulling out a water sunstone. He only had 2 water sunstones with him now. He would give one to Hung and exchange it with something else. You don't have many things in your hands, so don't take them. Just a... Hung was about to decline when he saw the crystal in Xiaoxian's hand. He paused and asked curiously, what is this? It can emit light. Xiaoxian explained the usage of the crystal. In a relatively closed cave, it was definitely more convenient to use crystals than fire. After all, burning a fire consumed oxygen. In a cave with poor ceiling, burning a fire for a long time would cause people to feel uncomfortable. Plus, it wasn't convenient to start a fire in the forest. It really emits light? Hung tested it according to Xiaoxian's instructions. It really did emit light. Do you have anything else? Hung was more interested in these new things. Xiaoxian shook his head. No. This was the only special item he had that could be used for trading. All right, I'll take this. Don't take anything else out. Keep some with you, sometimes it can save your life. Hung was already surprised that Xiaoxian could take out a crystal that could emit light. He didn't expect Xiaoxian to take out anything else that could catch his eye. He didn't like the bronze sword Xiaoxian had. On the way here, he had criticized the sword's craftsmanship in front of Xiaoxian. When I remove the bone plates from this fish, I'll tell you how to choose the best bone plates for armor. Hung couldn't stop talking. Armor is very important in the forest. For example, if you're walking in the forest and suddenly meet a beast that's faster than you can't escape in time and get bitten. If you're not wearing armor, you'll be bitten to death immediately. But if you're wearing armor, you won't be bitten at all. You won't be bitten at all. Ha ha ha. Xiaoxian. When he saw Xiaoxian's speechless expression, Heng's smile faded. However, he still thought he had told a very funny joke. His eyes were still smiling. Young man, don't be so serious. Smile more. Hung knew he was exaggerating. If you were bitten by a fearsome beast, even if it couldn't bite through you, a fearsome beast with a strong bite could still bite you to death even if you were wearing armor. Armor wasn't invincible. Of course, having armor was always safer than not having armor. Xiaoxian understood this. Before he came to the sea, he had always been wearing bugskin. It had good protection and was light. When Xiaoxian was still a mid-level totemic warrior, Xiaoxian's bugskin had helped him a lot when he fought against a high-level totemic warrior. However, Xiaoxian had used the bugskin to cover the core seed. He had given it to Tua and the rest to bring back to the old haunt. Now he had to replace it with something else. It was true that the forest was dangerous. Xiaoxian wasn't completely unscathed on his way here. It was just that he had a strong recovery speed, that was why he looked more relaxed than others. As they cooked the meat soup, Hung continued to tell Xiaoxian about his dangerous experiences in the search for Gongjia Mountain. However, after listening to him, Xiaoxian still decided to continue searching. Hung stopped trying to persuade him. Young people just don't listen to advice. It was rare to have someone to eat meat and drink soup with. Hung was in the mood. He talked a lot, but Xiaoxian managed to glean some useful information. After eating and drinking, Hung did not stop. Xiaoxian listened as he worked on the rope. First, Hung did not mind. To tribesmen, making rope was a daily skill, so he continued to talk to Xiaoxian. Xiaoxian made a rope and twirled it around his fingers. He had saved it for divination. When he came here, he wanted to combine the deciphered cloud patterns with divination to determine the correct location. However, on the way here, he had tried a few divination attempts and failed, so Xiaoxian did not continue. Now Xiaoxian had obtained more information from Hung. It was all very useful information. He believed that Hung was telling the truth, so he decided to try the rope divination again. Hung was talking excitedly when he saw Xiaoxian playing with the rope with his eyes closed. He was not angry. It was not easy for this young man to come to such a dangerous place alone and still be alive. He must be tired. Young people were young people playing with ropes when they were tired. However, very soon, the smile on Heng's face faded. It was replaced by a serious expression. He maintained his posture, but his eyes were fixed on Xiaoxian's movements. At first, he thought this young man was just playing with the rope to pass the time. However, Hung was once an upper-middle-class person in a big city. He had seen all sorts of things. Naturally, he could tell what Xiaoxian was doing. Divination. Was he from E City? No, this kid said he was from the Yanjiao tribe. He was a tribesman. On the way here from the river, Xiaoxian also had totemic patterns on his body. He was not from the Great Six. How did this kid know how to do this? However, when he thought about it, some tribesmen did know how to do divination. It made sense that this kid knew how to do it. However, this kid was so young. Was he familiar with divination? How far could he go? Heng's mind raced. This kid insisted on looking for Gongjia Mountain and even knew how to do rope divination. Perhaps he could really find it. No, he definitely couldn't. Other than the Xia people, no other tribesman could find Gongjia Mountain. However, even if they couldn't find it, they might be able to find it closer to Gongjia Mountain. The flames danced in the wind and the wood in the fire crackled. Hung was not distracted. His heart was in turmoil. Under Gongjia Heng's unblinking gaze, the rope in Xiaoxian's hand was knotted one by one. Hung did not understand what the knots meant, but he knew that if the divination failed, the knots would not be successfully tied. So did the divination result. Finally, Xiaoxian opened his eyes. Hung was nervous too. He did not even notice that the meat in his hand had turned into minced meat. What did you find? Hung was so nervous that his voice trembled. Xiaoxian was not surprised that Hung saw through him. In fact, he did the divination in front of Hung on purpose. That direction. Xiaoxian pointed in a direction on the other side of the river. I don't know the specifics. I just know we should go that way. I think it's the same direction you've been to before. Of course I know it's the right direction, Hung said urgently. But what happens after we get there? How far can we go? What will happen after we get there? Hung knew he was heading in the right direction, but he had been searching for 20 years, and he still could not find Gongjia Mountain. He might have been smiling happily earlier, but when he thought about the fact that he could not find it after 20 years and did not know if he could find it in the future, damn it, he was anxious. Xiaoxian scratched his nose that was scratched by the flying grass. I don't know either. I'll see when the time comes. This was the truth. Hung was speechless. As the sky darkened, Xiaoxian decided to spend the night here. However, he did not sleep in the cave or the stone house. Instead, he slept in a small house on a tree. This was another resting spot for Hung. If there was any danger on the ground, he would run up the tree. That night, Xiaoxian slept on the wooden bed in the tree house. He closed his eyes and fell asleep. However, in the stone house under the tree, Hung could not sleep. He tossed and turned in bed, unable to fall asleep. He could not sleep, so he got up and went to the forging room. When he was frustrated, he would go to the forging room and hammer at the copper blocks. He did it for no specific purpose, just to vent his frustration. He hammered. Clang! Should he go out with that kid to look for it? He hammered again. Clang! However, he couldn't bear to lose face. Why would the Xia people need help from outside the tribe? Dignity was important. He hammered again. Clang! He had been searching alone for 20 years and still couldn't find him. Perhaps that kid could be of some use? Clang! 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 Annoying! 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 Chapter 4:10. Hung struck copper the entire night. The next morning he heard Xiaoxian coming down the tree. When he came out of the stone house, his eyes were bloodshot. It was a terrifying sight. What's wrong? Xiaoxian had also heard the sound at night, but he could still tolerate it when he wanted to rest. People who often hunted in the mountains and forests would hear the roars of beasts, birds, and insects from time to time if they rested in the mountains and forests at night. If they couldn't even tolerate these sounds, then they wouldn't be able to rest. It was rare for the forest to be completely silent. When Hung heard Xiaoxian, he looked up at Xiaoxian with bloodshot eyes. His facial muscles twitched. Nothing. Then he turned and walked towards the cave. There was some water stored in the cave. Hung used a fruit shell as a ladle and splashed it on his face to wake himself up. He calmed himself down after a night of conflict. "I've thought about it," said Hung in a low voice as he squatted beside a wooden bucket filled with water. He was still holding a fruit shell in his hand, but he didn't scoop any more water out. Xiaoxian turned around to signal that he was listening. Hung continued. Hung didn't even look up. His hand was still scooping water, but his eyes were fixed on the ground as if there was something there that attracted his attention. "Aren't you going to look for Gongjia Mountain? I've thought about it and I think I should go with you." Hung looked like he was trying to explain himself but quickly added, "You're so young, this is your first time here. You must not be familiar with this area. I've lived here for 20 years. I've been out searching many times. I can give you some advice." Xiaoxian paused as if he just realized something. He clapped his hands and smiled. "That's great. Wipe that smile off your face. Don't think I don't know what you're thinking. TSK, why do I feel like hitting you?" Hung tossed his ladle aside and picked up his hammer. "Let's eat first. We'll have energy to work after we're full." To search for Gongjia Mountain, they had to prepare some life-saving items. First medicine, poison, food, tools, and so on. It hadn't been long since Hung left to search for Gongjia Mountain. If Xiaoxian hadn't appeared, he wouldn't have planned to leave so soon. That was why he didn't prepare many tools. However, since the plan had changed, he had to hurry up and get the things he needed. Xiaoxian's armor was made from the bone plates on the back of the crocodile they had eaten yesterday. First, he wasn't used to wearing it. Just like how the crocodiles were limited by the bone plates on their backs, Xiaoxian put on the armor. Although it had been modified in terms of flexibility, it was still much less comfortable than the insect skin he had worn before. However, in this situation he couldn't ask for too much. It was already good enough to have something to wear, as long as it had good protection. After making the armor, Hung brought Xiaoxian to gather herbs. "We need more medicine for healing and poison." After they returned, Xiaoxian familiarized himself with the armor while helping Hung set up traps. It would take 3 to 5 days to prepare everything, so he didn't plan to stop here. The cage they used to catch the crocodile was set up again. Hung used a type of beast meat as bait and hid the medicine inside. Then he hung the bait in the cage. When the crocodile swam into the cage and bit the bait, the cage door would be pulled shut. Unless someone came to open it or the cage was knocked open, it wouldn't open automatically. However, the crocodile would have been drugged and would lose its strength quickly. It wouldn't have the strength to knock the cage open. Be careful with this drug. Just a little bit. Hung measured it with his thumb and forefinger. It wasn't even the size of a green bean. It's enough to knock someone out. Of course, powerful people like us can hold on longer. Weaker people can't. A little bit was enough to knock an adult out. The ball of medicine Hung had placed in the bait was the size of a ping-pong ball. After the crocodiles ate it, they struggled. The so-called knockout drug was only a relative term. For some creatures it was a knockout drug that would only cause them to fall unconscious, but for others it was a lethal poison. If a person was given the same amount of medicine as the crocodiles, they wouldn't just faint. They might not wake up and die. At the same time, Hung told Xiaoxian not to overdose their prey. If they overdosed, it would affect them when they killed them. They had to control the dosage. Otherwise, if they overdosed on the crocodiles, what would they do if they overdosed? In 3 days, Hung prepared his own tools. He even gave Xiaoxian an axe. If Xiaoxian didn't have anything to use, he would need Heng's help if he ran into trouble. Giving Xiaoxian was also helping himself. In 3 days, no crocodiles took the bait in the cage. They weren't sure if the crocodiles didn't notice the bait or if they didn't come here. "How are we going to cross the river?" asked Xiaoxian. Although this main river was wide, standing on the riverbank, one could see the other side of the river in the distance. Compared to the river that isolated the tribe, it was not worth mentioning. "Should we make a boat? Or a raft?" asked Xiaoxian. "Don't think about that. Don't even think about it. You can't walk on the river. Although the river looks calm, the cage on the water hasn't caught a single crocodile in 3 days. That means the big crocodile is active in this area. If you want to make a raft or boat, you have to travel further. You can't use it here, you'll be swallowed along with the boat. That thing is very difficult to deal with and it takes a lot of time, said Hung. He didn't set up the cage just for hunting. It was also an indication. If they caught a crocodile, it meant the big guy wasn't active in the area. However, if they didn't catch a single crocodile for a few days, it meant the other smaller crocodiles were scared away. They didn't dare to fight for food here. Then what should we do? Xiaoxian waited for Hung to tell him his plan. Since Hung often went there, he must have a plan. Hung smiled proudly and took out a wooden whistle. He blew it 3 times a beat. Toot toot toot. The whistle was sharp, echoing far and wide through the forest. After a while, Xiaoxian looked up into the sky. A dark brown figure was flying over from afar. It was about 4 meters long. Look, here's my plan, said Hung proudly as he looked at the approaching bird. It was a bird that looked like a vulture. Most of its body was dark brown with only a few gray patterns. The bird didn't come down immediately. Instead, it perched on a tree and looked at Xiaoxian cautiously. Come down, Hammer. This is Xiaoxian. We'll be crossing the river together, said Hung. He wasn't sure if the bird understood him. It looked at Xiaoxian then at Hung. It cawed but didn't come down. Hung dragged out the remains of a ferocious beast to lure the birds down from the tree. You didn't come down when I told you to. Now you come down when there's food. Coward. Gongjia Hung even kicked the bird when it landed. He controlled his strength well so he didn't hurt it or send it flying. Caw. The bird cawed, ignoring Hung as it began to peck at the food. Bring us over when you're full, you hear me? Or I'll kill you with my hammer. Hung threatened with his hammer but the bird didn't even look at him. It was as if all it saw was food. However, if you looked closely, you would notice that it tilted its head slightly in Hang's direction when he spoke. It was listening. When he saw the bird ignore him, Hung huffed and smashed his hammer on the ground. He sat down to rest. He told Xiaoxian about the bird. That year I caught it in a trap. I put a copper chain around its neck and planned to pluck its hair and kill it for dinner. But that day there was a tremor in the forest. Many stones rolled down from the mountain. The rolling stones were not the main thing. The main thing was that there were all kinds of frightened beasts in the forest. It was a mess. Those traps were useless in such a situation. I was almost hit by a beast. I was just trying my luck. When I saw a struggling bird, I untied the chain and climbed onto its back. At first it wanted to throw me off, but after I pinched its neck a few times, it calmed down. After the chaos on the ground ended, I forced it to land. I thought that if it didn't listen to me, I would just use force and beat it to death. After all, there was a forest below and with it as a cushion, I wouldn't fall to my death. Who would have thought that this fellow would be so cooperative? After the crisis was over and I came back from hunting, if it was around, I would throw some meat to it. Gradually it got better. Sometimes, when it was hungry and couldn't find food or it couldn't beat the other birds in the flock, it would come to me for food. Now that I think about it, it's been more than 10 years. Hung reminisced, then turned to Xiaoxian proudly. What do you think? Mine's not bad, right? Although it doesn't listen to me, it helped a lot. Without it, it would be more difficult to cross the river. We would have to meet the crocodiles and maybe even the big one in the river. And actually, I used to have one too. It was bigger than yours and more obedient, recalled Xiaoxian. Then where is it now? Asked Hung. He thought Xiaoxian was bluffing. He didn't believe him. We haven't seen it in a year, sighed Xiaoxian. Pfft, Hung snickered. The one you're talking about probably ran away with the other birds. That can't be. It's always been alone, said Xiaoxian. Giant mountain eagles were not social animals. Unless they were in a group, they would usually be alone and would often fight with each other. However, what on earth was Cha-Cha doing now? Chapter 4:11. While Xiaoxian was thinking about Cha-Cha's whereabouts on the other side of the sea in the old land of Yanjiao, the shaman was also thinking about the same thing. After Xiaoxian disappeared in the desert, Cha-Cha brought Tua and the others back and left immediately. It was said that he appeared in the desert and last appeared in the Hui tribe. After that, he never returned to the ferocious beast's mountain forest. The shaman sent people out to look for him, but they couldn't find him. He originally planned to send people to the Hui tribe in the grassland to ask, but he didn't expect that before the people he sent out to leave the ferocious beast's mountain forest, people from the Hui tribe in the grassland came to find him. They said that Cha-Cha went to their tribe for a walk and then left with a few eagles. No matter if it was the eagles that had a conflict with Cha-Cha or the 2 eagles that went to the desert with him, they all left together. They were still wondering if Cha-Cha had taken all of them to the Yinjiao tribe, but they didn't find anything. Cha-Cha didn't have a mark, so it was different from the other ferocious beasts in the tribe. Except for Xiaoxian, it didn't listen to anyone, not even old Ku. Now no one knew where it was and where it took the air force of the Hui tribe. At the same time, a team of 7 eagles was flying up a mountain. They flew through the clouds and over the frost. When they were tired, they used their claws to hold on to the mountain wall. After a short rest, they shook off the ice on their wings and continued to fly up. The smallest eagle at the back was a little tired and was getting further and further away from the team. In the end, it could only rest on the mountain wall again. It was listless and cried out weakly. It looked like it didn't want to fly up anymore. The eagles in front of the team also stopped on the mountain wall and cried out, but no one flew down to help. One eagle wanted to, but it was stopped by the biggest eagle in the team and almost got hit by its claws. Since they couldn't help, they could only encourage it. The eagle above cried out to encourage its companion and signaled for the eagle that was lagging behind to fly up quickly. Cha-Cha was also watching from the side, but it did not give any encouragement. After waiting for a while and seeing that the eagle below was still not moving, it retracted its claws and grabbed a snow-covered stone from the mountain wall. Then, just when the other eagles thought that Cha-Cha would help, it threw the stone down. The other eagles. The stone hit the head of the eagle below. The originally listless eagle was stunned. The snow on the stone flew into its eyes. Because the stone was not big and was mostly covered with snow, it was not injured. It only felt a little pain. After throwing the stone, Cha-Cha grabbed another stone and threw it. This time the eagle dodged it. After being smashed again and again, the eagle below was enraged. The feathers on its neck were a little puffed up, and the ice on its feathers fell with a whoosh. Screech! The eagle below let out an angry cry and flapped its wings to chase after Cha-Cha. After throwing another stone, Cha-Cha took off and continued to fly upwards. Seeing this, the other eagles quickly followed. After a long time, the 7 eagles had all flown to the top of the mountain and stepped onto the ice field. They lay on the ground weakly and did not have the strength to fight. The few smaller eagles were too lazy to even cry out. After a short rest, Cha-Cha got up and walked forward slowly. It was starving and wanted to eat ice. This was the second time it came to this place. The last time it was that unknown eagle that brought it and Xiaoxian here. Thinking of Xiaoxian, Cha-Cha bit off a piece of ice from the icicle and threw it on the ground to step on it. Xiaoxian disappeared again. The fog on the top of the mountain was very thick, but they could still see some huge black figures around. In this team, the 2 largest eagles were standing on the ground. They were both more than 10 meters tall, and one of them was more than 15 meters tall. However, in this ice field, they were considered children. No matter how arrogant the 7 eagles were outside, they did not dare to act recklessly here. Even if the other eagles were old, they could still kill them with one swipe of their claws. If they could fly here safely, it meant they had the strength to live. That was why they did not offend them and did not want to get themselves killed. The giant mountain eagles had to go through a trip to Eagle Mountain to grow. Every time they came here, it was like a snake shedding its skin. There were 2 eagles in the team who came here for the first time. They followed the 2 largest eagles out of the 7 with curiosity. Cha-Cha did not go over. It chose an icicle and rested there, thinking, when I leave this place again, I'll scare Xiaoxian to death. On the other side, Xiaoxian looked at the unwilling bird and turned to ask Hung, Hammer really won't throw me into the river? No, of course not. Hung promised, then glared at the bird called Hammer. Did you hear that? Do your job well and I'll give you a reward. Or I'll roast you today. Hammer bird let out a slow caw. See that? It agreed. Don't worry, it won't throw you into the river. Hung patted Xiaoxian's shoulder. Young man, be brave. Trust me more. All right, trust me more, said Xiaoxian. The things they had to bring were heavy. The weapons, especially Heng's big bronze hammer, would make the eagle protest for a long time. For safety's sake, they had to come in batches. In the past, Heng would come in 2 batches. Hammer would bring Heng over first, then fly back to bring the other things. Heng's plan was for Hammer to bring Xiaoxian over first, then come back to bring the other things. Finally, Heng would be brought over. We have to keep an eye on our things or the monkeys in the forest will steal them all. Xiaoxian, you go over first. Heng had told Xiaoxian before that there were many annoying monkeys on the other side of the river who had stolen Heng's things. All right. Xiaoxian brought his own things. His things weren't as heavy as Heng's, so they could be done in one trip. Hammer jumped on its back and flew to the other side of the river. As he flew higher, Xiaoxian was able to see the area better, and he could see the situation within a large area. It was better to have air support. Xiaoxian didn't know that Cha-Cha had escaped with one of the Hui tribe's air forces. The people of the Hui tribe were frantically looking for them. Xiaoxian saw an island on the surface of the river. It wasn't actually an island but the corner of a giant beast's head. Its bulging eyes were open, staring coldly at the sky. Xiaoxian felt that hammer bird, who was carrying him on its back, had shrunk its body a few times. Then it flapped its wings vigorously and flew higher and faster. It wanted to avoid this area as much as possible. Even if it was in the air, it was still very afraid of the creatures in the water. In the river, the area above the surface of the water expanded, revealing a long and narrow beak and 2 large nostrils. These were all signs of who this big guy was. This was the giant beast that had caused all the other crocodiles to disappear. This was the king of the river, a giant crocodile of unknown age. Gongjia Heng told Xiaoxian that there was a time when he was riding a bird over the river. When he was about to reach the other side, he looked down from the sky and suddenly felt uneasy. He thought about the rumors and told the hammer bird to fly higher and faster. At the time, Hammer couldn't fly very high because it was carrying a lot of things and it was too heavy. It took a lot of effort to fly high. When he felt something was wrong, Heng's mind raced. In the end, he made up his mind and threw a bag. It contained a few weapons he had painstakingly crafted. Although it was painful, it lessened the burden. The giant beast below suddenly rushed out, half of its body above the surface of the river. Its mouth was like a giant clamp, filled with death and blood, waiting to trap its prey. Hammer flew higher and faster, barely escaping from the beast's mouth. If he still carried the heavy items, he and Hammer would have been in the crocodile's mouth a long time ago. The bag Heng threw down was swallowed by the giant beast. The weapons he had painstakingly crafted were excreted somewhere at the bottom of the river. They couldn't be recovered. That was the beginning of the grudge between Heng and the giant beast. No wonder Heng would rather take a few trips than carry too many items at once. If he carried too many items, he wouldn't be able to react in time. This was a lesson he had learnt. Clearly, that experience was deeply imprinted in Hammer's heart. That was why he was so scared when the giant beast appeared. Fortunately, the giant beast judged that they were flying above its hunting range and did not move. Finally, they safely reached the opposite bank. Xiaoxian looked around cautiously. Because of the giant beast in the river, there were no other dangerous beasts around. However, they still had to be careful. When Hammerbird took 2 trips to deliver the items and Heng, the 2 of them heaved a sigh of relief. However, this was only temporary. According to their agreement, Heng hunted a beast for Hammerbird as a reward. They didn't expect it to continue delivering the items because Hammerbird rarely came here. Most of the time it was only active on the other side of the river. After delivering the items, Hammerbird would turn back and return to its flock. Birds like Hammerbirds looked good in size but were at a disadvantage when fighting alone. They were social birds and relied on the strength of a group to survive in the forest. Alright, Xiaoxian, we have to speed up if we keep going forward. That's the territory of those annoying monkeys. There are too many of them and they're hard to deal with. If we don't move fast enough, we'll be at a disadvantage. Heng advised Xiaoxian as if he was an experienced person. He reminded Xiaoxian first. Do you want me to share some of your items? Xiaoxian asked as he looked at the items on Heng's back. No, it's just these. I brought more last time. Just take care of yourself. Follow me, don't get lost. I won't go back to save you if those monkeys surround you. After scaring Xiaoxian, Hung picked up the items and started running. After leaving the riverbank area, they could already feel many gazes hidden among the branches around them. There were also some rustling sounds that sounded like a gust of wind on the leaves. They're here. Let's go. Hung yelled. Then there was the sound of a tree trunk being cut. Hung saw Xiaoxian, who had been following him, accelerate and run in a straight line through the tall trees, leaving Hung behind. Hung was speechless. What the hell? What kind of monster is this? Why is he running so fast? The monkeys are staring at me. Can't you come back and help me? Chapter 4:12. Xiaoxian returned to help Gongjia Hung. That way they could leave this place as soon as possible. The monkeys in this area were not friendly. Although they were not big, they were hard to deal with. According to Gongjia Hung, these monkeys like to eat human brains. He had found a few human corpses in this forest with their skulls cut open. Anyone who could find this place was no weakling. That was why they could not fight these monkeys head-on. They would be at a disadvantage. Leaving as soon as possible was the best option. Since they were traveling together, they had to help each other. Initially, Gongjia Hung thought that Xiaoxian, a young man who came here for the first time, would encounter many difficulties. He thought that if he helped, he would be able to save some face and teach this kid a lesson. He did not expect the situation to be reversed. Because of this, when the two of them ran away from the area occupied by the monkeys, Gongjia Hung's expression froze. He did not know what to say. When he thought of his excuse, he blushed and thanked Gongjia Hung dryly. In the forest behind them, there were still the unreconciled screams of the monkeys and the sound of beating branches. They seemed to be very angry. They actually couldn't stop a single intruder, and were left far behind by the two of them. They didn't even touch the human skin. After leaving the monkeys' territory, the two of them hurried on. Xiaoxian did not need to look for them again. Gongjia Hung led the way. He had been here many times, so he was familiar with this place. There were some small rivers around, similar to the ones in Yinjiao's hunting grounds. During the dry season, they would see the riverbed. They did not know which branch this river came from, but it extended all the way here. There were some smaller crocodiles and other aquatic animals living here. It was not the dry season yet, so they could hear the sounds of animals in and around the river. An anaconda was leisurely moving in the bushes by the river. It was lazy and did not care about the other animals around it because it was already full. When Xiaoxian passed by it, he saw that there was a bulge on the anaconda's body. Judging from the shape, the anaconda had probably just swallowed a crocodile. In the beginning, Hung had told Xiaoxian what to watch out for. That was why Xiaoxian didn't need any reminders. He safely avoided the hidden predators. Xiaoxian was doing too well. He did not look like a first-time visitor at all. Because of this, Hung could not find another chance to teach Xiaoxian. This made Hung realize that his excuse of tagging along was unnecessary. He was frustrated. He could only sigh. The tribesmen who lived in the forest were indeed very suitable for moving around in the forest. 2 days after the departure. At this speed, we'll reach the resting place before dark, said Hung. Because he came here often, there were a few resting places along the way. One time when he was looking for Gongjia Mountain, he found a cave on one of the mountains. It was a suitable resting place. At the time, there were many snakes and insects in the cave. He even used medicinal powder to get rid of them. After that, every time he left, he would smoke the cave with medicinal powder to prevent it from becoming a nest of snakes and insects. Before the sun set, they reached the mountain Hung mentioned. The mountain was steep and there were all sorts of wet moss on the walls. It was slippery, but it was not a problem for Xiaoxian and Hung. It's here. Hung looked at the large rock blocking the entrance. There were traces of green powder next to it. This was the medicine he had applied the last time he went back. It was still there, so there should not be any insects or snakes in the cave. There was no need to waste medicine to get rid of them. Take this, I'll move the rock. Gongjia Hung passed his bag to Xiaoxian, then moved his shoulders. With both hands on the rock, he pushed hard to the other side. This rock was heavier than the crocodile he hunted. It was difficult to push it. Suddenly, Hung felt the resistance lighten. The rock moved quickly to the other side. Hey, didn't I ask you to hold the things? You push. Hung wanted to tell Xiaoxian to just hold the things. Why push the rock? Because of the limited materials, he treasured the weapons in his bag. If he lost them, it would be difficult to find them again. Unfortunately, there were many creatures flying in the sky and jumping in the forest. They loved to steal things, so he could not push the rock. However, when Hung turned his head, he realized that Xiaoxian was holding their belongings in one hand. He did not put them down. His other hand was pushing against the rock. You did a good job. These were the only words Hung managed to squeeze out. He thought to himself, so what if you're strong? However, as a fellow traveler with Xiaoxian's help, Gongjia Hung felt much more relaxed this time. In the past, it would take at least 3 days to get here. Now it only took 2 days. Hung had to admit that Xiaoxian was quite capable. They lit a fire and went out to hunt a small fearsome beast before the sky turned dark. They cooked it outside and brought it back to the cave. When I first came here, I wanted to build a house. Then I realized that a cave is more convenient, said Hung as he barbecued the meat. Our tribe lives in caves when we hunt. Xiaoxian told him about his hunting days. In the past, Hung did not understand the life of a hunter in the forest, but after 20 years, he was no longer curious. He did not ask. It was cold at night and the wind was strong. The cave was not deep, so the fire danced in the wind. Xiaoxian walked to the cave entrance and moved the rock slightly. He left a small gap to prevent the wind from blowing in and affecting the fire. When he saw Xiaoxian move the rock so easily, Hung felt jealous. You Yinjiao people are all so strong? Yes, our tribe has a lot of manpower. It's suitable for forging. Speaking of which, I think I've heard of your tribe before. It's been too long, so I don't remember. In the past, Hung had focused on forging, so he only heard about it from others. He did not know much about it and was not interested in it. Later on, when he was searching for Gongjia Mountain, his information was even more limited. After a full meal, Gongjia Hung extinguished the fire and was about to rest when he saw Xiaoxian take out a glowing crystal, an animal skin scroll, and a weird-looking pen. He used the light to write and draw on the scroll. What are you writing? Asked Hung. I'm adding a map, said Xiaoxian. Why are you drawing a map? How many times do you plan to come here? I don't know. We'll be lucky if we can make it back alive. Don't think too much. As a real Xia person, I've been searching for 20 years and you think you can find it in one go? But it's okay if you can't find it. It'll be a learning experience, said Hung comfortingly. Actually, he was looking forward to finding it on his first try too. However, he had been attacked time and time again. Hung was prepared to fight for a long time. He would not give up. If it weren't for the fact that he couldn't trade with other tribes to get materials, he would have stayed in this area. However, he was still curious about Xiaoxian's map, so he leaned over to take a look. He had seen the map Xiaoxian drew after deciphering the cloud patterns. At that time, it was just a few simple strokes. Now it was a lot more detailed. The places they passed, the monkey forest, the pond, the shrubs, and even the high mountains were marked. Why is this empty? Hung pointed at a spot on the scroll. I've never been there. I've been there. Let me tell you. Hung pointed at the empty spot on the map and started talking. He had been there when he was searching for Gongjia Mountain. Although it had been a few years, he still had a vague impression of it. Then he said, when we get back, lend me a copy of your map. Hung liked Xiaoxian's simple yet effective markings on the map. He wanted a copy too. Sure. Since Hung agreed so readily, Xiaoxian did not feel awkward. I'll draw a copy for you when the time comes. Hung was satisfied when he heard Xiaoxian's reply. At this moment, he felt exhausted and sleepy. Sleep early. If you don't, you'll suffer. After 2 days of rushing, he was exhausted both physically and mentally. It was as if he had been smithing metal for more than 10 days. Just one night's rest was already rushed and this kid was still staying up late? Xiaoxian continued writing. When Hung saw this, he did not say anything else. He would make the kid regret it later. However, when Hung woke up the next day, he realized that Xiaoxian was even more energetic than he was. He even went hunting early in the morning and brought food back for breakfast. Hung was about to say something when Xiaoxian asked in surprise, Master Gongjia, why are there 2 suns outside? When they arrived yesterday, although it was close to sunset, there was indeed only 1 sun. Xiaoxian had only seen one before, but this morning, when he went hunting, there were 2 suns in the sky. Where did the other one come from? After Xiaoxian's question, Hung no longer cared why Xiaoxian was so resilient. He smiled mysteriously. It's only 2 suns and you're already scared? What will you do if there are more suns in the sky? Xiaoxian was silent for a moment, then probed, an illusion? Hung was even more surprised. If other people heard that there were more suns in the future, they would definitely ask for the reason. He did not expect Xiaoxian to be so direct. You can say that. Hung walked out of the cave and looked up at the 2 suns in the sky. He sighed. If Gongjia Mountain was so easy to find, there wouldn't be so many people buried here. Whether it was the people in the forest or the slave masters in the cities, they all used the sun's movement to determine their location and time. But what if the sun's movement changed? Right now, the 2 suns in the sky did not affect their journey. However, the further they went, the more illusions they would encounter. It would be harder to determine their location and their decisions would be seriously affected. Although the 2 suns were not far away from each other, people who were not familiar with this place would have a hard time determining their location. Do you know which sun is the real one? Gongjia Heng's eyes gleamed with pride when he asked this. However, when he thought about Xiaoxian's divination skills, he was excited. Why don't you do a divination? Hung went to look for a straw rope. Xiaoxian closed his eyes and opened them again. He looked at the sky and pointed at the sun on the left. That's the real one. Gongjia Hung was about to hand Xiaoxian a straw rope excitedly. He wanted to observe Xiaoxian's divination skills and test Xiaoxian's proficiency. However, when he heard this, his hand paused and he dropped the straw rope. How did you know? Asked Hung. I guess. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.